Welcome everyone back. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. I now recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. Welcome to today's Oversight Committee hearing on the Government Accountability Office's 2025 high-risk list. Before we get started, I want to recognize that this will be the Comptroller General Dodaro's final time testifying on the high-risk list as he is set to retire later this year. I want to thank you, Mr. Dodaro, for your decades of service to the United States. Under your leadership, GAO has done excellent work to expose waste, fraud, abuse in the federal government and provide recommendations to prevent it. At the start of each new Congress, the GAO publishes a high-risk list to update us on programs ripe for congressional oversight and action. The 38 areas on this year's report all present either a financial risk of loss of at least $1 billion taxpayer dollars, or they present a risk involving public health or safety, delivery of essential services to Americans, national security concerns, privacy, economic growth, or the rights of citizens. These potential billions of dollars could be better utilized for lowering taxes, improving roads, or making everyday life more affordable for the American people. The average American works too hard to see tax dollars wasted. My goal with this hearing is simple: to make sure the taxpayer dollars is being spent wisely and to get more of it back to Americans' pockets where it belongs. This list helps track the progress of deficiencies of programs so that Congress can perform oversight to promote efficient and effective use of taxpayer money. The federal government programs created and funded by Congress must stay true to their intended purpose, meet the stated objectives, and remain stewards of taxpayer dollars. However, year after year, bloated federal programs managed by the federal bureaucracy continue to fall short of their goals and are often plagued by fraud and abuse. Despite the excellent reports by GAO each year, there continues to be rampant waste, fraud, and abuse across the federal government. For more than 30 years, GAO has provided members of Congress with this report. Yet familiar programs remain on this list now, which were there in the very beginning. Americans are tired of the federal government failing its report card. The American people elected President Trump to drain the swamp and rein in the runaway bureaucracy. And President Trump is delivering on this promise. President Trump has tasked DOJ with conducting a government-wide audit to eliminate Washington waste. GAO's extensive reports and recommendations to the executive branch have given DOJ a strong starting point as it takes on the federal bureaucracy. DOJ has taken note of GAO's critical work in identifying trillions of dollars lost to improper payments made by programs like Medicaid and unemployment insurance. And now DOJ is taking action to address the root causes of improper payments. DOJ has recognized GAO's reports on the need to modernize IT for a more efficient and effective federal government. And Elon Musk and his A-team are working on solutions to make that happen. The GAO's high-risk list includes the Department of Defense's financial management. DOD, I will remind everyone, has failed audits for 7 years in a row. Under President Trump's leadership, Secretary Hegseth is going to work with DOJ to finally address this. Now more than ever, GAO's work tells us that we need more data, more tracking of funds, more oversight, and yes, more efficiency to know exactly where taxpayer dollars are going. We are excited to work with the Trump administration to continue our mission of cutting out waste, fraud, and abuse. I look forward to hearing from Comptroller General Dodaro on the good work GAO is doing and how this committee and the Trump administration could protect the American people's money from being wasted by their government. Americans want more than another report telling them about all the problems in Washington. They want action to right the ship, and that is just what President Trump, DOJ, and the Republicans in Congress are doing for the American people. And with that, I now yield to the Ranking Member Connolly for his opening statement.
I thank the Chair, and I welcome Mr. Dodaro. This is one of my favorite hearings in the calendar year, and I think it's also very important. If you really want to get at waste, fraud, and abuse, and you want to achieve efficiency, which is the ability to maximize good outcomes while minimizing waste, wasted time, wasted energy, wasted money, the high-risk list of GAO is a great place to start. In fact, when this committee has paid attention to that list, we have effectuated serious savings. I'll give the example. In information technology modernization, which I focused on in the 16 years I've been in this committee, we have saved, according to GAO, $31 billion. So when we talk about efficiency and trying to achieve results for the American people, you don't do it by taking a wrecking ball to the entire structure and hope you get the bad with the good. You, in fact, take out a scalpel and you cut out the excess, you cut out the waste, and you do it in a thoughtful and reflective manner. Unlike what the chairman has just said, I don't believe President Trump and Elon Musk have in fact done that at all. They have done mass firings, mass resignations, and attempted resignations. To fire everyone in a probationary status is not to pick the good from the bad. It is, in fact, to treat everyone as the same and hope for the best. And our seed corn is being lost. We need to have talent for the future. The approach of Doge so far, and Elon Musk in particular, actually is injurious to the future course of skill sets needed in the federal government. We need higher skill sets. We have to replace a number of workers in the federal government who are going to retire and are eligible for retirement. Unfortunately, the approach of this administration so far, led by Mr. Musk and Doge, does not do that at all. So I'm looking forward to talking about other opportunities like improper payments, which this committee talked about for years. I believe, Mr. Dodaro, the improper payments add up to something like $281 billion a year. You know, if we multiply that times 10, that's almost $3 trillion we could reduce the debt by if we got serious about dealing with improper payments. When we look at revenue owed to the federal government, owed to IRS, but not collected because of IRS's inability to audit and collect, that number is anywhere from $0.5 trillion to $1 trillion a year. The last Trump commissioner of the IRS said it was $1 trillion a year. Well, if we took that high number and multiplied it by tens, that's $10 trillion. You know, that's a third of the national debt almost. So there are things we can do. Another one is legacy systems, which again GAO has talked about. They've highlighted the top 10 candidates for retirement in legacy systems of IT, which would save over $331 million a year. The oldest legacy system I believe you've identified, Mr. Dodaro, is 51 years old. So we can do productive things. We can find common ground, Democrats and Republicans. But we on this side of the aisle are never going to support a mindless wrecking ball approach to, quote, achieving efficiency in the federal government. That's not how to do it. It will wreak harm on the American people. It will damage our form of government, and it's not something that will ever merit our support. I yield back.
Ranking member yields back. I'm pleased to welcome today's witness, Comptroller General Gene Dodaro, who brings more than 50 years of experience at the U.S. Government Accountability Office and has served as head of the legislative branch agency since 2010. The Comptroller General is serving the final year of his 15-year term. Mr. Dodaro has testified before Congress 220 times on GAO's recommendations to improve the performance and operations of the federal government, leading to work that has led to over $1 trillion in financial benefits to the American taxpayer during his tenure. Comptroller General Dodaro was influential in developing the concept and content of the high-risk list, which over the last 15 years has averaged financial benefits of about $40 billion per year. Thank you for joining us. I look forward to our discussion this afternoon. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witness and his staff will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses answered the affirmative. Thank you, and you all may take a seat. We appreciate you being here today and look forward to your testimony. And I want to remind the members of the committee that when the Comptroller General testifies, he has his staff with him, and sometimes he'll yield to his staff to answer certain questions, so that's why they were all sworn in. Let me remind the witnesses that we have read your written statement. It will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statement, sir, to 5 minutes. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, it will turn yellow. When the red light comes on, your 5 minutes has expired, and we ask that you would please wrap it up. So now I recognize Mr. Dodaro for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Conley, members of the committee. It's very good to be here today to talk about GAO's high-risk area, which focuses on fraud, waste, abuse, mismanagement, but also on broad-based transformation that's needed for a number of our programs to achieve greater efficiency and effectiveness in government. There's been some good progress since our last update. As has been mentioned, we've saved over $760 billion over time through implementation of recommendations that have been acted on by the Congress and the administration on the high-risk areas. Today, I want to focus on a couple of things. One, we're adding one new area this year, and that's improving the delivery of disaster assistance. Storms are becoming more frequent and intense. In the last 10 years, the federal government's appropriated $500 billion for disaster assistance. FEMA is stretched way too thin. They're managing right now over 600 disasters. Some of them go back 20 years. The system is fragmented. There are over 30 different federal agencies involved in delivering assistance. There's confusion, overlapping regulations. We need reform in that area, and that's why we're highlighting it. There's also opportunities to better manage the cost of the federal government. As has been mentioned by the chair and ranking member, improper payments remains a very intractable problem. The last 6 years, there's been over $150 billion every year in improper payments. That's not even the complete number. There are a number of programs aren't even reporting. There's $600 billion net tax gap between the amount the taxes owed and taxes collected by the IRS. Voluntary compliance is hovering around 82, 85%. We can do better in that area to make sure the government's getting its fair share of revenue. There are many major acquisitions across the government, including DoD weapon systems. They're on a high list. The Department of Energy contracting for nuclear development and cleanup of our weapons complex. These contracts are consistently overrun, over budget, and delays occur and don't deliver on the promises. Information technology remains a government-wide problem. It's designated a government-wide list, acquisitions and operations. The government spends over $100 billion a year. Most of that goes to maintain existing legacy systems and not to new technology. So the government's not harnessing the power. FAA's, just to give a couple examples, FAA has 138 air traffic control systems. 31% of those systems are not sustainable by FAA's own amounts. There's not enough spare parts. There's not enough money. There's not enough plans. And their plans to develop many of these systems aren't intended to resolve the problem for 10 or 13 years. We've got the VA electronic healthcare system. They're on their fourth try. They've spent over $12 billion already. We've only deployed the system to 4 medical centers, another 5 in the next year, but there's 160 more to go. So these are issues. Cybersecurity, I designated that a high-risk area across federal government in 1997, added critical infrastructure protection 2003. It is still a problem. It's grown in intensity, and the government's not acting at a pace commensurate with the evolving grave threat, not just to the federal government's information systems, but the critical infrastructure protection, the electricity grid, water systems, our telecommunications network, all across the 16 critical infrastructure sections of the United States. There are many other areas on the list that deal with public health and safety, oversight of medical products. We've got drug shortages. We've got not enough inspections of drug manufacturers, food safety. The Bureau of Prisons is in significant disrepair and understaffed. And I can go into many of these areas during the discussion. But the main message here is that action and heightened attention on these issues can save billions of dollars, improve public health and safety, and also go to the heart of improving the service and the effectiveness and efficiency and the return on investment and build better trust in our government institutions. I thank you for the opportunity to be here today and would enjoy entertaining your questions.
Thank you. I now recognize Dr. Gosar from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I extend the same thing, Mr. Dodaro. I always look to this hearing to talk to you because you've always been good to us and always been very fair. So thank you for doing that. If I had to highlight just one department of the government's efficiency accomplishment so far, it would be proving that the waste, fraud, and abuse infecting the federal government is not just isolated to one department. It's government-wide. Since the last GAO high-risk report in 2023, not a single item has been removed from that list. The Biden administration contaminated nearly every agency and dug our nation deeper and deeper in debt. This high-risk list includes improper Medicaid payments and extravagant DOD acquisitions to fund endless wars. For 3 years, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act provided FMAP funding to states to continuously enroll Medicaid beneficiaries regardless of eligibility or their private insurance. According to the Kaiser Foundation, enrollment in Medicaid and CHIP grew by 23.1 million, or 32.4% between February of 2020 and April of 2023. And once again, the DOD failed its 7th consecutive audit. Perhaps we shouldn't authorize Abram tanks and send them over to Ukraine to be instantly destroyed. Mr. Dodaro, the high-risk list also mentions the infrastructure of the Bureau of Prisons. Bureau of Prisons is planning to close 7 facilities and 3 satellite camps due to budget constraints. I know who has been empowered with emergency funds, ICE, who needs more detention beds. My question for you would, allowing ICE to use these BOP facilities as detention centers help generate additional revenue and expand the use of excess federal property, perhaps even improve the infrastructure?
We haven't taken a look at that issue yet. I understand what your concerns are. And I don't know. We'll be taking a look, and I'm sure asked to look at how ICE is using those facilities and whether that's having, what effect that's having, both positive and potentially negative. And we'll have to see. But I'm deeply concerned about the state of the prisons. They're very understaffed, and there's excessive use of overtime, and that can lead to both safety concerns for their staff as well as incarcerated individuals. They're also, despite the First Step Act, they haven't really focused on evaluating programs that are intended to help people transition back into society and not prevent recidivism, from occurring and them ending back in prison shortly after their release. So I don't know to what extent ICE using the facilities will complicate or potentially have other effects on that area. But we'll look at it.
And to follow up on that is if you regard this as a transfer, could you tell us actually how you would transfer that property to?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the ownership of who owns the prisons.
Now, the report also flags that the FDA must do a better job to protect public health and improve its oversight of temporary use or, quote, unapproved medical products like drugs, vaccines during emergencies. Question for you. In your investigation of this lack of FDA oversight, did you uncover why the FDA approved the emergency use of the experimental COVID shot, but not ivermectin for the treatment of COVID?
Let me ask Justy. Let me call our expert up in that area. This is Jess Farb, Ms. Jess Farb, who's Managing Director of our healthcare work.
Thanks, Jess.
Congressman, we haven't looked into the use of EUAs for ivermectin or vaccines at this point. We haven't been asked to do that yet by Congress.
Well, one of the things that we're going to have to really look at is approve FDA because there's trouble all the way around, and I think both sides can agree on that one. The report recommends the collection of tax payments for oil and gas leases to help improve, quote, improve the government's fiscal position. Would you agree that funds generated from the taxes on oil and gas leases on federal lands would help reduce the deficit?
Yes.
So let's approve some more oil and gas leases?
Pardon me? No. Our finding is that it's already being produced.
Okay.
And the government's not collecting, has no assurance it's collecting the amount that's already due. I'm not suggesting they, produce more, but for what's being produced, royalty payments are due to the government. The Interior Department systems are in kind of disarray, and it's not clear that they're collecting the revenue that's due to the government.
Thank you, Mr. Dodaro. I'll yield back.
Chair recognizes ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Dodaro, welcome back. You've been doing high-risk reports to this committee for a long time. And on the high-risk list this year, there are how many items again?
There are 38 items.
38. And how many has Congress taken action on?
There's quite a few. I mean, we took off last.
Well, quite a few is a little general.
Well, I can add
19?
before.
20?
I would say probably 20 is a fair statement. 20.
20.
Over time.
So Congress hasn't ignored the high-risk list,
No.
but there are some perennial favorites that keep on coming back for one reason or another, are there not?
That's correct.
And what would be a couple of examples of that?
Well, there's some charter members that have been on since 1990.
Can I ask you to speak close to the
Yeah,
microphone?
sure. There's some charter members that have been on since 1990. Medicare, for example, the DOD weapons systems has been on the list since 1990. Medicaid joined in 2003 along with real property across the federal government. As I mentioned earlier, put cybersecurity on in 1997. So those are some of the ones that were early additions to the list. And there have been, I want to be clear, there have been improvements in some of those areas, but they're not to the point where risk is being managed properly and we're still have opportunities to do better.
Right. If we adopted all of the recommendations GAO put forward on the high-risk list, any idea what the savings could be to the United States taxpayer?
Upwards of over 200 billion.
200 billion a year or total?
Total, but some of them would continue on
Right.
time, you know.
Okay.
And that's a very conservative estimate. I think it could be more, much more.
Well, just for example, the savings from IT modernization, which has been on your high-risk list, is 31 billion. So yeah, and by the way, it's a gift that keeps on giving.
That's correct.
If we focus on real efficiency. Are you familiar with the Taxpayer Funds Oversight and Accountability Act, previously known as the CFO Vision Act?
Yes.
And would that make the federal government work better for the American people, in your opinion, if we adopted it?
Yes, yes. That was based upon recommendations from a GAO study where we studied the impact of the CFO Act over the 30 years of its implementation and some suggestions to make it stronger.
And does that bill also address improper payments and fraud?
With some additional provisions added, it could and should. And I'm happy to provide additional suggestions to the committee in that regard.
Yeah. Could you just talk a little bit about improper payments? Refresh our memory what we mean by improper payments.
Yeah.
We don't mean the government deliberately goes out and throws money from the rooftop.
No, that's not in the official statutory definition, and I would not support that.
For the record, neither would I.
The official definition is it's a payment that it should not have been made or was made in the wrong amount. Some of them can actually be an underpayment. Most, however, are overpayments, probably 90% of them. They happen when money is given to somebody who's really not eligible to receive the benefit, or the payment calculation is incorrect.
Right.
Or somebody submits a bill for a service that was never provided. And of course, some of the improper payments could be fraud. And fraud is broader. And the improper payments really are only estimate of about 80 federal programs. They're a very small subset. They should be bigger. But fraud occurs throughout the federal government. So fraud can occur beyond the improper payments. But the improper payments...
Final point, it just seems to me that part of the problem with improper payments to the federal government is there's no sort of incentive or reward system in the federal workforce to reward you for catching improper payments and trying to, deflect them. The reward system is getting money out the door and, understandably, and providing benefits and services to needy citizens. Real quickly, could you comment on that and how we address that?
That's exactly right. I mean, more people in the federal agencies have gotten in trouble for not paying someone than they have from paying someone that they shouldn't have paid. and the incentives need to be changed. The other complicating factor is many of these programs are administered through the states. So there needs to be incentives at the states. And Labor Department, for example, has offered a suggestion that there be legislation to give states the ability to keep 5% of whatever they recover in improper payments and use it to strengthen their payment integrity processes. And I support that.
I thank the chair.
Chair now recognizes Dr. Fox from North Carolina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Dodaro, and we'll miss you when you retire. We appreciate you. Last year, North Carolina saw immense devastation caused by Hurricane Helene, with over 100 lives lost and nearly $60 billion in damage. While FEMA did show up to provide aid, I'd give FEMA and the federal response to Helene an overall grade of a D+. It's no surprise that quote, improving the delivery of federal disaster assistance, end quote, was added this year to the GAO high-risk list, which states that attention is also needed to improve processes for assisting survivors. I could not agree more. One of the biggest problems I recognized while helping constituents affected by the storms is how FEMA's representatives on the ground are telling people what the agency cannot do rather than what it can do. FEMA has a lot of experience dealing with disasters, yet it seems to have learned shockingly few lessons along the way. There should be an information roadmap available to those affected by disasters, including what they can expect from FEMA. This roadmap should include how much and what kind of aid they can expect to receive, a timeline for aid information on all available assistance, and what types of decisions will have to be made in the coming weeks, months, and years. What recommendations do you have for FEMA to, quote, improve processes for assisting survivors, end quote?
I'll give a couple examples, and I'll turn to Chris Curry, who's our expert in the area, and he can enumerate all the suggestions that we have. One of the things is we think FEMA gets involved in too many disasters. Right now, it's based on a per capita amount of $1.86 per capita. It hasn't been adjusted over time. So they get involved in a lot more disasters that if they effectively evaluated the state and local ability to do it, we estimate they could be non-involved in about 27 fewer disasters, which would help deal with this issue. So I'll turn to Chris for other examples.
Yes, ma'am. The way you described it, I could not agree more with. The problem is we have a system that was created to do good, but it's not helping the survivors that it's supposed to help. And your description is right on. The problem is we have the survivor in the community has to pull the assistance out of FEMA and undergo a very complicated process that's often fragmented across multiple agencies, and it's very confusing, and survivors get worn down, understandably. So in terms of our recommendations, we actually have a number of options to simplify the system, but also to reform how the federal government provides this assistance so communities and survivors can get it quicker and more easily.
I have a follow-up question I'll send to you all because I'm not going to have enough time for you to answer that, and I need ask another question. We've worked very hard in this committee on postal service reform, and we are concerned that the high-risk list notes the Postal Service lost $16 billion in fiscal years 2023 and 2024 and has $181 billion in debts and liabilities. The Postal Service cannot continue operating as it has with its financials in such bad shape. What suggestions do you have for us to shore up the Postal Service so it can continue to provide critical service, especially in rural communities like the ones most of us represent?
Yeah, there's a basic expectation gap between the Congress and the Postal Service, and I think that gap has to be closed. Congress wants certain delivery expectations set for the Postal Service, but there's no way they're going to generate the revenue necessary in order to meet those expectations that Congress has for it. So I think there has to be a negotiation between Congress and the Postal Service, say, this is what we want you to do, how much can you generate? They need to keep trying to reduce their costs, and they've had some success, but not a lot. And I think that's fair to ask them to reduce their costs. But at some point, Congress has to say, here's what we want, and here's what we're willing to help contribute to pay to keep that level of service going.
It's my understanding that they've done not nearly enough to automate and to reduce those costs. Do you have some suggestions in that area?
Yeah, this is Dave Maroney, our director in charge of postal work.
So they have made some initial steps to transform their network, but there still is a lot that remains to be done. The network is antiquated. They are in the process of trying to transform it, but there have been some problems in that transformation. In certain areas where it's been implemented in Atlanta and Richmond, you've seen declines in service performance as the rollout was done. So it's really important for the Postal Service to focus on what are the lessons from that, so as they continue this transformation, which is really important to get at your point, it's rolled out as smoothly as possible so you both get those gains and you don't get the significant hiccups that happened with the first two implementations.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I do want to follow up with our witnesses, particularly on the post office. 'Cause
Absolutely.
it affects every American, and it's very critical to us. Thank you very
Absolutely.
much.
Very good. Chair recognizes Ms. Norton from Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For this year's high-risk update, the Government Accountability Office found that inadequate staffing and skills gaps contributed to more than half of the nation's highest risk challenges. Mr. Dodaro, why are federal workers such an important part of the equation in tackling high-risk areas?
Having the right numbers of staff with the right skills is very essential. Let's take VA. Healthcare is on the high risk for timely, not providing timely and quality health care. There's a real shortage of mental health providers. We have veterans that need suicide care, for example. Last I checked, there were 17 veterans a day committing suicide. So we need well-qualified mental health providers just in that area alone. You need guards that are well-qualified at the Bureau of Prisons. You need good people managing our nuclear weapons complex, security experts, et cetera. You need software engineers at DOD, and I could go on and on. So these areas, and we've had strategic human capital across the federal government on our high-risk list since 2001. I've been very concerned about the federal workforce doesn't have the proper skills that are needed to address many of these important areas that are providing critical services to the American people and at the heart of providing public safety. For example, there are not enough inspectors at FDA to inspect foreign drug manufacturers. They only have 22% of the manufacturers. Yet most of our drugs now come from foreign manufacturers in China and India and other countries, and we're not inspecting them the way we should. Our food supply, 15% is imported, but in some categories like seafood, it's over 80%. Fresh fruits and vegetables, over half. And we don't have enough inspections being done on our food supplies either. EPA is not doing enough assessments to assess toxic chemicals before they're introduced into society. So these are the reasons that we have this issue on the high-risk list, because they don't have the right people and enough skills in order to execute their mission to protect the American people.
Well, unfortunately, Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency missed the memo on when they came to power and began terrorizing the federal workers that serve the American people day in and day out. And let's not forget that a third of these federal workers are veterans. Instead of focusing their efforts on recruiting and retaining talented people to put their skills to work solving the nation's challenges, Elon Musk offered an illegal scam buyout. 10 millions to millions of federal employees. that will only make the government staffing challenges worse. And last Saturday, he was at it again, threatening on social media that all federal workers would lose their jobs if they failed to reply to an email and report what they did last week. Mr. Dodaro, is it a best management practice to throw around indiscriminate threats of mass firings, regardless of job duties and mission needs?
Yeah, I would not consider it a best practice. But I do think, I've spent most of my career, decades, butting heads with the bureaucracies across the government. There's a need for change, but how you do it matters. And going about it in the way that's being done now can cause some short-term problems for the government because it can create other vulnerabilities, unintended vulnerabilities. The way I've suggested in the past that this be done is the government figure out what functions it does not want to do anymore. Then you can deal with the people in those functions or ones that don't have the skills that you need anymore. But it should be done in a respectful way, and it should be done also in a way that does not hurt the federal government in a long term. We need people to be coming into the government. Whatever any administration decides to do with their policies and what they want the government to do, at the end of the day, they're going to need good people to be able to do it. And not enough younger people have been coming into the government with the kind of skills that are needed going forward. So you have to be careful that you don't disincentivize people to want to give public service. Because public service is important to implementing any policy initiative by any administration, no matter what the policy is. I'm agnostic on the policy. That's for elected officials. But I've seen good policies that don't get implemented effectively because you don't have the right people.
Very good. Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Higgins from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, thank you for your service. What a very impressive record, good sir. And you are a unique individual to have been able to make it through so many significant changes in the executive branch and in Congress. So we thank you for your service, and I mean that. I'd like to dig into two areas in my brief 5 minutes with you, sir. One will be the Department of Defense, but before we get there, I'd like to talk to you more about the United States Postal Service. You mentioned that Congress should clearly identify to the United States Postal Service what we need, what we expect, and I would ask you, did we not do that in 1970 with the Postal Reorganization Act, when the Postal Service was reformed and redefined as an independent agency and allowed great autonomy and independence from Congress? They were essentially, and I'm simplifying here, and I ask you to correct me if I'm wrong, good sir, but essentially the Post Office was given great autonomy and the ability to run itself, set its own fees and the price of stamps, and establish its own financial conduct within the Postal Service. It was essentially set up as a government-owned corporation. And part of that deal, the 1970 law, required performance to deliver for the American people and a net neutral fiscal performance or a break-even fiscal performance. So I would say that the United States Postal Service has failed to comply with existing law, but perhaps I'm oversimplifying that, and I yield to the gentleman. Would you please respond?
Yes, sure, absolutely. Fundamentally, structurally, your description is sound, and it was intended for the Postal Service to operate like a private entity, all right? until you run into situations where if you're in a private entity, this postal service facility, we want to close this post office in this rural area. It's
If the
not,
gentleman will yield for a question to his comment here,
Sure.
but there was nothing in the 1970 law that prohibited the manifestation of private competition. So any reasonable corporate structure
Right.
would have anticipated the manifestation of private competition. So I would say that the post office was never insulated from the impact of potential private competition, nor are they at this time right now.
yeah, no, I'm not talking.
So why would we give them the autonomy of corporate structure without the responsibility to perform as within the reasonable guidelines of corporate structure, including consideration of private competition? And I yield back
Yeah,
to the gentleman.
yeah. Well, there's certain areas they have competition in, and certain areas they're a monopoly. First-class mail being a classic example of the monopoly. Well, all I'm saying is that over time, as they moved to exercise their autonomy, there were certain things that Congress balked at. Closing of postal facilities was one. Moving to 5-day delivery and packages on 6 days as opposed to 6-day delivery, Congress balked on. And so that's the type of thing I think we need to negotiate around those particular things that a private sector entity would do, but there's not an appetite for the type of changes that would occur. I'll ask my expert
Would you
to add on.
concur? And it'd be my final point, and then please answer. Like, how would you assess the USPS performance regarding their mandate by law to break even? For decades, they have failed.
They are not self-sustaining. They have an unsustainable business model, which is why there needs to be a definition of what level of service going forward, as Mr. Dodaro was saying, and also some figuring out of how is the Postal Service with those services going to support it, because right now they are not financially self-sufficient. They're supposed to be.
First-class mail is not coming back. I mean, that's their most profitable areas, first-class mail. It's not coming back due to email and other, electronic changes. And so they haven't been able to cut costs fast enough to meet these services. And so they're absent some additional compromise between Congress on delivery and perhaps, some contribution to them or a different model for what they have. Right now, the model just is not going to work. And eventually what's going to happen is that in 5 years or so, their money that they have to pay post-retirement health care benefits is going to run out.
It's unsustainable. Words of wisdom, Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. I yield.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Lynch from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, good to see you. They tell me that you have testified over 220 times. I think Mr. Conley and I have been there for most of them. And I just want to say how grateful I am on behalf of the American taxpayer for your good work. I can say that throughout your time here, you have been honest and fastidious with your reports and thorough. I would say that you've been strictly nonpartisan throughout your time, and that has been helpful as well during some tough issues. Just the fact that you're a straight shooter has helped us with our work on our end. I think, honestly, you've been a shining example of what a federal employee, a federal worker, and a government taxpayer watchdog should be. And so I wish you well. I am sorry that you are leaving because we need you now more than ever. I'm just hoping that a little bit of Gene Dodaro rubbed off on those people sitting behind you. And I think that may be the case. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a report of the Inspector General of the Veterans Affairs Administration, the OIG determination of severe occupational staffing shortages at the VA fiscal year 2024.
Without objection, so ordered.
So, Gene, if you would, we had a report that was filed by Mike Missel, who was the Inspector General for the VA until he was fired by President Trump about, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks ago. Anyway, he reported that the VA Health Administration, which cares for more than 9 million veterans in 1,400 healthcare facilities and 170 VA medical centers, was experiences severe occupational staffing shortages of about 3,000 people, 2,959 people, with over 82% of the facilities reporting severe shortages of medical officers and nurses. So the nurses are like the Marine Corps of our health system, and especially at the VA. They do it all. Doctors take the credit, but the nurses do the work. And what did President Trump do? And Elon Musk came in and fired another 1,000. That was right when they came in. And then later on, which included healthcare workers, employees who process benefit claims, workers who staff the VA suicide crisis line, with record suicides among veterans. And then, just yesterday, the president went back and fired an additional 1,400. So now we're down 5,400 employees at the VA. This is something we used to agree on between Republicans and Democrats. Can you offer us an assessment on how these terminations will impact veterans and their families?
We're going to take a look at that because it's on the high-risk area, but it's not going to help the situation. We already had them listed as having shortages in those areas, and they have difficulty retaining people. I'm very concerned about mental health and suicide prevention. We're looking at the crisis hotline right now, the request of the Senate. We're due to issue some reports. I'll ask Jess Farb to add her views. She's our managing director for healthcare and follows this carefully. But it's a reason to be concerned.
Yeah.
Well, Congressman, as
Gene, you could be a little more forthcoming because you're retiring. So, if you want to have at it, let me know what you think. But ma'am, go ahead.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
So I would say
apologize.
that it's obviously VA has struggled with just making sure that veterans get timely access to health care. And so not having the right number of people with the right skill sets and the right ability to treat veterans is going to affect what's already been a longstanding issue at the VA in terms of timeliness of care. As we've reported in the past about how long veterans have waited. So the people that schedule the appointments are very essential to making sure that veterans are able to get care both in the VA facilities and in the community.
Yeah. The other thing that worries me is, right now, I asked the VA, how much of a backlog do you have on claims, cases coming, veterans coming in, especially with the PAC Act. Actually, what's the backlog of cases at the VA? Because it's taken forever for people to get appointments, and they told me they had a backlog today of 250,000 cases at the VA. They just laid off an additional 2,400 people. So, I mean, can you surmise what the impact that's going to create?
Well, it's going to create make an already bad situation likely worse. One of the times VA handling of disability issues is also on the high-risk list. We've had it on the high-risk list for a long time, and there was a point in time, I don't know, I hope it's a little better now, but where if you went for an appeal, it'd take you up to 7 years to get your appeal resolved.
Exactly.
People would die before they would get a decision on their disability claim area, and the PACT Act did increase their workload. Now, I haven't looked specifically at what's happened, but we will as part of our work. But I know the situation was not good to begin with.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, for your indulgence, and thank you,
And generosity.
Mr. Dodaro.
Generosity,
Yeah,
yep.
and indulgence.
Okay, thank you. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Thank you, Comptroller General Dodaro, for being with us today. And I apologize for you having to bear witness to the tantrums that unfolded in this committee earlier today. The Oversight Committee has convened today to discuss something throwing the left into a tailspin, spending more time protesting and disrupting official proceedings than legislating, all because we're talking about cutting waste, fraud, and abuse and government mismanagement. For decades, this wasn't a partisan issue. You know who championed cutting back on waste, fraud, and abuse? No other than President Obama and Joe Biden. In 2011, Obama signed Executive Order 13576 to create a Government Accountability and Transparency Board under Joe Biden's watch to root out waste, to root out fraud, and to root out abuse in federal agencies. Joe Biden himself even admitted back then, quote, cutting waste, fraud, and abuse has been something Washington has talked about for decades, but now more than ever, what the American people need is action, end quote. But now the left has done a complete 180, claiming cutting waste, fraud, and abuse is fascist. They say it's a threat to democracy. They even say our nation's chief executive shouldn't be allowed to direct or control the executive branch, or even ask an unelected bureaucrat who works for him what they did at work last week. We just want to know, what are the top 5 things you did at the office? You should know in about 5 minutes. And if you can't answer that question, you probably shouldn't be employed by the federal government or any company or organization. I would never hire you. Their disruption has nothing to do with policy and everything to do with Trump derangement syndrome, and I fear that their disruption is pathological. It's about their need to oppose anything tied to President Trump. They'd rather protect bloated bureaucracy and light our tax dollars on fire than admit he was right. So I'll repeat, they have Trump derangement syndrome, and I fear this is terminal. Now, turning to an issue of great importance to me as chairwoman of the Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Government Innovation Subcommittee, Mr. Dodaro, the 2025 high-risk list highlights serious failures in federal cybersecurity and technology modernization, as you are, I'm sure, fully aware. Federal agencies spend billions of dollars a year on software without a comprehensive or detailed understanding of what they're purchasing and how it compares to what they're already paying for. In other words, a lot of duplication. GAO has reported without improvements to IT portfolio and investment reviews, saying the federal government will likely continue to expand resources and IT investments that do not meet the needs of the government or the public. What steps should agencies take right now to actually understand the software they're buying instead of just throwing taxpayer dollars at it, hoping for the best? What's your advice?
Yeah, I'm going to turn to Carol Harris, who's our Director in Information Technology, and she can enumerate for you.
Terrific.
Thank you for the question. So a number of things that can be done. First of all, with regard to IT management, I mean, we have a major issue where we have $100 billion annually going to the IT budget across the federal government. 80% of that money is going towards sustaining old systems. So we have to tackle the legacy
How old are some of
issues.
these systems?
Some of these systems range, up to even like 50 years old. So they're old and they need to be.
These are the legacy systems,
These are
right? On
correct.
very
These
old
are the legacy
technology.
systems.
What kind of
that's right.
technology were they coded with?
With COBOL, for example, and other antiquated computer languages. And that's part of the issue where now for these particular systems, the government is having a difficult time finding staff and knowledgeable people to actually work on these programs because these computer languages are out of date.
After I taught myself HTML in college, because there weren't college classes on how to code HTML, and I considered it a real programming language, some people may not, but I learned COBOL when I was back in 1999. I worked on Y2K stuff, and I mean, that was almost 26 years ago, 27 years ago when I did that. And the fact that we're still using it decades later. Real quickly, I only have 45 seconds left. What are some of the security and operational risks resulting from the last administration's failure to review and manage federal government IT?
Well, when you take a look at those legacy systems, for example, because we're continuing to manage them, there are cybersecurity vulnerabilities associated with those, as well as the staffing challenges, as well as, just increased costs associated with maintaining these. So the security vulnerabilities in maintaining these old systems are very real, and we have to address them. And we've made multiple recommendations. We have 700 recommendations that are still open that need to be addressed immediately.
And thank you both for your time today. I will yield back. I will now recognize Mr. Khanna for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I wanted to comment on the earlier debate where Representative Grothman and Representative Green said that some of these cuts that Musk and Doge are making are good and making our country more efficient. And our side said, no, there are federal workers who are being fired without cause, and they aren't the poor performers that they are. And I guess my question for the chair, and I know Chair Comer isn't here is, why not have Elon Musk come before this committee and make the case? I mean, why not have Representative Green ask him to explain why she thinks the situation is good and have the confidence to explain that to the American public? And we can ask him questions about where we think that he has violated the law. But I do not understand what the reluctance is to have Mr. Musk come here. If you're so confident on your side that what he's doing is in the interest of the American people, why not have speech and have him here? And I hope that the chair will consider that request. Mr. Dodaro, I have great respect for you, and I have great respect for your service. But with due respect, this is not a time for caution in speaking out. Your predecessor, Elmer Statz, took Gerald Ford to court because Ford was not willing to comply with the Impoundment Act. This was not a decision that she made, that Statz made, but lawyers, Statz spoke out. And I want to ask you whether what you think the President is doing in pausing these payments automatically is a violation of the Impoundment Act.
Yeah, we are looking at that issue. We've already sent letters to the administration asking them to explain their legal position to us. And we will be making rulings as to whether or not these issues violated the Impoundment Control Act or not.
When will you be making that?
As soon as we can get the information from the administration. We're following the court cases as well, so we're evaluating the court filings
What
there.
if they refuse to give you the information?
Well, we have the information that's available through the court filings of what their legal positions are for many of these issues that are subject to the litigation.
Would you say within 45 days? Because that's the rescission, I mean, they have about 45 days. I mean, I think the automatic payments is a violation itself.
Yeah, we are going to make these decisions as fast as possible. I
You
fully intend to carry out our responsibilities under the Impoundment Control Act expeditiously and thoroughly.
But how about by May 1st?
I'll check with my attorneys, is what the people always say.
Let
But
me ask you,
I'll
but
check. I'll let you know.
But
I'm going to do it as quickly as we can. But we need to be careful and thorough, because the next step for us is to go to court ourselves. I mean, under the Impoundment Control Act, if we say there's an impoundment, the money's not released within a certain period of time, we have to go to court.
And are you prepared to do that?
Yes. Yes. But I need to be prepared and be careful. And because when I go there, I want to win. All right? So we're going to do this as fast and as thoroughly as we can. We have a good track record on this area. I have a good group of attorneys, and we're going to do a thorough job.
So can the American people be assured that if there are violations of the Impoundment Act in the automatic pause or in the cuts, that you will make sure that you prosecute that or take it to court and are confident that you will prevail?
I can be confident that I will take it to its full closure. I'm not going to predict what the court's going to say. I know better than that. But they have their own independent decision-making. They're making some decisions right now on these very topics. And but I know, and I'm confident I can give the American people assurance we will carry out our responsibilities.
But to all the constituents who are saying we're not doing enough, these things are getting paused, there are cuts that are happening, you can assure them that you are moving as expeditiously and taking this as seriously, that this is your top priority in making sure that you're going to uphold the Impoundment Act and take aggressive action if it's violated.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've been talking about this as soon as things started to unfold. We sent our letters over. This is very important. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into making these decisions. One is how specific Congress was in the appropriation law to begin with. We need to take that into account. This year we're in a continuing resolution stage, so you don't have a lot of specifics for this fiscal year, whether it's know your money or not your money. There's some pauses for programmatic review. There's a lot of details and a lot of legal considerations to sort through. But this is a high priority for us, and we're going to execute our responsibilities.
I appreciate it.
All right, I'll now recognize Mr. Biggs for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you again. Welcome back. I have a question for you with regard to the Impoundment Act. Let's say Congress appropriates $1, but the administration finds a way to do the same task that dollar is supposed to go for 75 cents. You don't think that they're violating the Impound Act if they don't spend $1, the full dollar, do you?
Well, that's a hypothetical question. I'd like to see the federal government spend $1 on something. I don't think that that's going to happen. But the theory behind your question is, did they spend everything that Congress intended them to spend?
That's
and
right.
if they don't, there's nothing wrong with that. The Impoundment Act provides a remedy for the president to submit a rescission proposal to the Congress, and the Congress has 45 days to approve it. If they don't, then
Right,
they
but
agree.
the process can be cumbersome. Is the point? You
Well,
kind of diminish
there's-
the efficiency by doing the rescission act. But I don't want to take all the time from
Yeah,
that.
but it's there's a process.
So in your written testimony and in your report, you say that the areas on the high-risk list include programs that represented about 80% of the total government-wide reported improper payment estimate for fiscal year 2023. Agencies and the Department of the Treasury are taking some steps to address this issue. Much more needs to be done to control billions of dollars in overpayments and prevent fraud. For example, CMS should improve the timeliness of audits to identify and recover improper payments. You also make clear that while congressional action may be necessary to eliminate issues and that interagency coordination is needed, no progress has been made on improving Medicaid program integrity since it was added in 2023. In 2023, GAO designated the unemployment insurance system as high risk because, quote, unemployment insurance's administrative and program integrity challenges pose significant risk to service delivery and expose the system to significant financial losses. Similarly, GAO has, quote, designated Medicare as a high-risk program due to its size, complexity, effect on the federal budget, and susceptibility to improper payments. Further, the significant amount of Medicaid improper payments is a principal reason GAO included Medicaid program integrity on its 2023 high-risk list as well. In fiscal year 2023, the estimated amount of improper payments for Medicaid reached approximately $50.3 billion. Where's all that money going?
Well, it's going to the wrong places. It's not quite clear. The estimates here, are made based upon sampling procedures. So it's not an enumeration of all the payments. It's just, for those that are in the sample where they make the payment, they try to recover the money. For other things, it's just an estimate of statistically.
So you're basing it on statistical information, right?
Right.
So it's impossible for you to tell how much of that is due to fraud.
That's correct. Although we have made recommendations. We did a fraud estimate.
What's your fraud estimate?
Our fraud estimate from 2018 to 2022, that 5-year period, we estimated annual losses to fraud to be between $233 billion and $521 billion. So that period covered both before the pandemic and during the pandemic, which had, in my view, epic fraud during the pandemic.
Right, right. Federal Medicaid spending was over $575 billion in fiscal year 2023 and is expected to increase over the next decade. What is needed to better manage the program?
Is the Medicaid, did you say Medicaid or Medicare? I'm sorry.
Medicaid.
Medicaid.
Yeah.
Number one is you need to have better control over managed care portion of Medicaid. The estimates on improper payments for Medicaid only really are based upon the fee-for-service portion, which is less than half of the payments now. And we've encouraged much more aggressive fashion looking at the managed care portion. They've increased the number of audits. They're starting to find more problems. So that's number one.
Okay, so I got to move on.
All right.
Because there's just too much here.
Okay.
Because you also noted that DOD has major problems as well. And so I've introduced, once again, the Audit the Pentagon Act. which aims to increase transparency and accountability in the defense budget and imposing financial consequences, because have they ever had a clean bill of health on an audit?
Not for the overall department. There are some components, and I'm very pleased, the last 2 years, the Marine Corps has got an unmodified clean opinion. The other services, not so much yet. Now, I noted that Secretary Hegseth has made this a priority. I'm going to be communicating with him, meeting with him to say, if you want to do this, here are the things that need to be done in order to achieve an unmodified opinion for the whole department.
And I'm sorry that we're out of time, because I would like to hear all your Medicaid remedies as well as your DOD remedies, but I have to yield back. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll now recognize Ms. Stansberry for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Dodaro, thank you so much for being here today, and also congratulations on your soon-to-be retirement, and thank you for your service to our country. I want to just take a couple of minutes to talk about what this hearing actually is, which is to talk about the high-risk list. I'm a former OMBer, and we use GAO's reports at OMB to actually implement change across the federal government, and so I'm very acquainted with all of the work of your staff. Thank you for everything that you do. So I want to just clarify for folks who are watching at home, the Government Accountability Office is a nonpartisan government agency. It's part of Congress, it's part of the legislative branch, and your job is to audit, evaluate, investigate, and to provide recommendations as a congressional watchdog, both to Congress and to the executive branch, correct?
That's correct.
And what you do every year as part of your work is produce this high-risk list. And this year, the one you're presenting to us today includes 38 areas that you've identified that, as you just said in your testimony, would save money, help ensure the health and safety of the American public, and help to build trust in our federal agencies. And I want to briefly talk about some of the things that appear on this list. In fact, as you mentioned in your testimony, the first thing on here is the improvement of delivery of federal disaster assistance. That's FEMA. Second is improvements in surface transportation. We've got HHS and Public Health Services, Department of the Bureau of Prison improvements. There's a bunch of DOD recommendations here about improving contracting and business practices, improving small business administration, resolving federal housing finance issues through HUD, EPA issues around environmental liability. There's national nuclear security on here, enforcing tax laws, including the IRS, improving certain FDA and DOI programs, improving VA service, CMS programs, and also the regulation of the financial regulatory system. And all of these things really are about the transformation of how the federal government provides services. And I heard you just say to Mr. Lynch as well as to Mr. Khanna that with respect to some of the specific programs that were asked about, that the just indiscriminate elimination of funding and staffing for these programs would not only fail to actually resolve the issues that you guys have identified, but potentially make them worse. Is that correct?
That's a possibility.
Yes. So, obviously there's been a lot of conversation today in this committee about the actions that are being taken pursuant to DOGE by Elon Musk, and this indiscriminate funding freezes that is happening, the dismantling of these programs, the hacking of federal data, and the mass firings. And we know that there's more that are planned for this week. But unfortunately, we don't exactly know what Elon Musk has actually been up to, because he won't come to this committee. And in fact, our Republican colleagues have shielded him from having to appear. But he did appear over the weekend at CPAC at their political action event that was held here in the Washington area. And, here he is. He was wielding a chainsaw with the Argentinian leader. And I'll just say, as somebody who grew up working construction, I know what two dudes who don't know what to do with a chainsaw look like. But it's also obvious that these guys actually don't also know how to manage a federal government and how to address high-risk areas where we actually do need to address issues of waste, fraud, and abuse. abuse. And in fact, because I worked at OMB, I know that not only are they not addressing these issues, they're looting the federal government and breaking the law daily. And this recklessness has really severe consequences, as was just outlined by some of the other commentary already. But I want to note some of the human impacts. In my district, I was just home this weekend. We heard from tribal college teachers who were fired, VA employees who are not able to help support the veterans that they work with. A colleague of mine who was told this week that his PTSD counseling would be canceled. Tribal justice programs that pay for cops had their funding frozen. I mean, the reality is that this guy right here, who is an unelected billionaire, is literally looting the federal government right now, and he has no idea what he's doing. He's not even addressing the fundamental problems that have been identified by our nonpartisan watchdog. So, you know, I want to be clear also that the Republicans, as of today, we took a break right before this committee, went and voted on a rule to advance a tax package that would make these cuts permanent to pay for a permanent tax break for billionaires. So what these guys are up to is not about government efficiency. It's about looting the American people in the Treasury to pay for billionaire tax cuts. With that, I yield back.
Okay, I will now recognize Mr. Cloud for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here. You know, our country, of course, is $36 trillion in debt. The American people, if we were to ask them, and we have in the previous election, were to ask them if we thought the federal government was working for them, they would say, no, it seems like we're working for the federal government. Yet we continue to hear over and over from the left that people who are coming in doing things differently don't know how to run the government, and the argument seems to be like, well, we need people who know how to do what we've been doing, even though it's continually led to failure. Now, I've, since being a new member here, I've appreciated you coming before this committee because for the last several years, I've felt like you were maybe the best good faith effort in helping us find waste, fraud, and abuse. You know, the last several weeks have been very interesting as new technology tools have been brought to the table. And, you know, I find myself kind of like in a little quagmire here in the sense like I've always thought it odd that we begin counting waste, fraud, and abuse at $1 billion, even though it's the best good faith effort we've had. I've said a number of times, like, your report should probably be our agenda as a committee, or certainly somebody should be doing it. In the last few weeks, though, we've seen a handful of very young people with some very specific technical skills come and seem to expose a lot that we haven't been able to see through the Government Accountability Office. So we have a lot of new information at our disposal when it comes to the very specific things that we're seeing. I wanted to touch on the report because while I do think that you do good work, I was also concerned about some of the things that I do see in the report and maybe some of the lenses that things are being interpreted through. One, for example, interest payments and what we're paying on interest isn't even mentioned, and yet it is superseding our military spending. One of the things you mentioned is strategic human capital, and all the solutions to address it have to do with basically more government. Okay, we need more programs, more training, more, and it continues to fall into this thing that we see continually throughout the bureaucracy where the answer to failed government is more government. And sometimes that can be the case, but there's nothing addressing the fact that it takes 2 years to fire a bad employee. You know, we could talk about the State Department recently. A lot's come out about USAID and, you know, transgender operas overseas and those kind of things. I didn't see, and again, it's 300 pages. I might have missed it, but I didn't see very much addressing the State Department. And then there was a lot concerning climate stuff, specifically when it came to connecting disaster relief to climate activity, man-made carbon creation. And that, at best, connecting that to hurricanes is at best debatable science right now, yet the report acts as if it is established, long-held science, and makes a number of recommendations for that. On the other hand, it says that we need to look at oil and gas revenues, and you actually mentioned it earlier that, you know, maybe we need to more, but we're talking about $15 billion there, and maybe, maybe there's 10% we're not getting, so we're talking, you know, $1 to $5 billion, but yet On the EV mandates, we lost $7.5 billion. That's not addressed in the report as well. So I have some concerns about whether we talk about it being nonpartisan. I think that's your best intention, but at the same time, with a multi-thousand people on staff, I have some concerns about the true nonpartisan nature of the report. I do want to give you some time to address something because a lot's come up about Medicaid recently. There's a lot of fear-mongering, chicken little stories, the sky's falling if we do or touch anything in Medicaid. Meanwhile, we know that if we're going to correct course on the fiscal course of our nation, we have to address the mandatory side of things. But you give a number of things touching Medicaid that we can do that don't actually address the people that Medicaid was affected for. In other words, we're not taking disabled people off Medicaid where, you know, children are still being, their needs are still being met. Could you talk about some of those ways that we can find savings for the American people?
Yeah,
and do it in a way that,
yeah. Before I get to Medicaid, though, let me just touch on some of the things you talk about. First, on an interest on the debt, I issue a special report on the fiscal health of the federal government, basically saying it's on an unsustainable long-term fiscal path. I specifically call out the increase in interest on the debt, call for a plan to put the federal government on a more sustainable fiscal path, point out the main cost drivers, which are health care, demographics, and growth and interest on the debt. So that's,
Thank you.
and I've also tried to get, made recommendations for about a decade to try to change the approach to setting the debt ceiling, which does nothing to control the debt. On the issue on staffing, we're not saying you need more government. We're saying the Congress and the administration said, this is what we want to do. And what we're saying is, okay, you don't have the people in order to accomplish what Congress has set in statute and the administration's priorities are. So we're not determining the size and scope of government. That's up to elected officials. We're saying, however you define it, it's not being implemented properly. Last,
So,
on the climate
on that
issue,
point,
yeah.
on that point, with the change of policy that we're seeing from the Trump administration, could we expect this report to deal with climate issues differently and oil and gas issues differently?
Well,
Or is it
on the
gonna be
climate, yeah, on the
produced
climate
through the
issue,
same
I
sort of
want to
thing?
be clear on that. Our only focus on the climate issue is not on what's causing it, what's changed. It's on the fiscal exposure to the federal government. And that is the federal government as an insurer. Our flood insurance program is not actuarially sound. The flood insurance program owes $22.5 billion to the Treasury after the Congress has already forgiven $17 billion. The Defense Department's been under instructions from the Congress to look at its impact on its installations domestically and internationally. The agriculture crop insurance has more than doubled over a period of time. Wildfires have expanded, and the federal government's fiscally exposed. So all we're saying is, as the fiscal guardians of the federal government, it's costing a lot more money, and it'd be better to focus on resilience and to try to build things in up front. We're not commenting on the science of it or whatever on that area. Let me ask my colleague to talk about Medicaid, because we have a lot of good suggestions.
I'll try to be quick. So we have over 65 recommendations, but there's 3 key ones that kind of get at program integrity in the Medicaid program, to your point, Congressman. So looking at the budget neutrality of Medicaid demonstrations and making sure that CMS is really clear about what that means when states experiment. We want to make sure that we're not spending more than we otherwise would have. Looking at the data behind some of the non-federal share of payments in Medicaid, so understanding state-directed payments to managed care plans and understanding sort of provider taxes and other things that states use to help finance their share. And then leveraging the findings of work that they can be doing with state auditors. We've made a lot of points about this. Just using the trends and the findings that the state auditors find through their audits to inform their own oversight of the program. So all areas directed at program integrity activities.
Thank you. Appreciate your work.
Chair recognizes, let me, for a second time, go to Mr. Garcia, and we can follow up with that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'll submit the fiscal health report for the record for the committee.
Okay, thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Garcia.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do want to appreciate the work of the GAO. I think there's incredible work that happens there. And of course, a lot of uncovering of waste, fraud, and abuse happens. Mr. Dodaro, I want to thank you for your important testimony. I agree there is absolutely a responsibility for us to look at ways of reducing the deficit to actually make government more efficient. And I think that while I served as mayor before coming to this committee, we worked really hard with our auditor, with our state auditor to do just that. And so thank you for being here. So Mr. Dodaro, I do have some simple yes or no questions for you, which I think are important. Mr. Dodaro, do you believe that the recently firing of promoted federal workers who are therefore on probationary status does anything to solve the important problems that you've raised today? Yes or no?
Well, I was sworn to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and the whole truth sometimes doesn't get reduced to a yes or no answer. And so in that case, I think it's important to look at what functions were being provided and what was done in those cases. But it's important that the rules be followed, that there's certain personnel requirements and rules.
Would you say yes or no?
I would say that and the question was whether it would solve any of the problems that we identified on the high-risk list, and the answer to that question would be it's doubtful.
Exactly, and I agree with you. I agree. It would be a no. Now, what about has the GAO recommendation ever included firing FAA aircraft safety inspectors who repair air traffic control facilities?
No.
No, I agree. Has the GAO ever made any recommendation on firing USDA animal and plant health inspection service workers who were tracking the bird flu outbreak or other outbreaks in poultry or cattle?
I do not believe so, no.
Thank you. That's a no. Has the GAO recommended firing National Nuclear Security Administration workers who oversee our nation's nuclear stockpile?
No.
What about firing the only locksmith at Yosemite National Park? Has the GAO ever recommended that?
I'm not sure we've ever run into the locksmith at the park.
And the answer to that is you have not.
Right.
And so I thank you for that because, of course, these none of these have ever actually aligned with any of the recommendations that have come out of your office, but yet they are clearly huge priorities for Elon Musk and his Doge team. It's obviously a crusade against the government, against actually helping people across this country, and it's the hypocrisy that we're seeing today and in our committees that I think is quite disturbing to House Democrats. Now, Republican colleagues have spent a lot of time warning about unsustainable deficits. We know that today there is a huge vote, of course, we know, on a budget. Their budget version and bill has a $4.5 trillion tax cut giveaway, essentially, when we should be asking the super rich to actually pay more. And at the center of this, we know, is a huge cut to Medicaid. They're targeting at least $880 billion, maybe more, in Medicaid cuts. Now, in my district alone, we have 300,000 people that are dependent on Medicaid approximately, which is a huge amount of the community and the district. Now, nationally, 80 million people we know are on Medicaid, but it actually impacts every single district across the country. Whether you're talking about Kentucky's 1st District, where 26.5% of the population there, 155,000 people are dependent on Medicaid. Whether it's in Ohio's 4th District, over 100,000 people depend on Medicaid. That's 15% of the population. Whether it's in Louisiana's 3rd District, 196,000, almost 200,000 people dependent on Medicaid. Or in Georgia's 14th District, where 109,000 people, or 16% of the population, are dependent on Medicaid. We know that Medicaid saves lives. These are huge numbers of people. These are folks that are colleagues of ours on the other side of the aisle that are members of this committee and that oftentimes are here at this committee. So this actually has an impact to our constituents. It means elderly and disabled people won't get their health care, their long-term care. It actually impacts people that have real substance abuse issues. And one other thing that people don't realize about Medicaid, there's a lot of conversation in this country about births and encouraging people to have more children. Medicaid covers 41% of all births in our country. 41% of U.S. births were paid for by Medicaid. And so if this is really about supporting families and about expanding families, we should also be talking about supporting and expanding Medicaid coverage for Americans. We should be providing more coverage, not less. And so with that, I want to thank you again for your work, and I'm hopeful there are enough Republicans in today's vote will do the right thing and avoid these Medicaid cuts. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Dodaro, and congratulations on your upcoming retirement. You know, for the past 4 years, Democrats have been in control of basically all government functions for the American people. We are at $36 trillion in debt, and the lies are getting to be outrageous. Just listen to one of my colleagues talk about Medicaid. The truth is, for people watching at home, your Medicaid benefits cannot get cut unless the governor of your state and the state cuts your benefits. That's the real truth. Republicans here in Washington, here in Congress, we are not taking away anyone's Medicaid benefits. As a matter of fact, we're trying to cut out improper payments. We're trying to cut out fraud. At my DOJ subcommittee, I had a hearing just 2 weeks ago where we talked about improper payments. It is unbelievable, and I'm sure you would agree, Mr. Dodaro, that the amount of money that's being paid to dead people, to foreigners, to criminals, to terrorists is amounting in the billions and billions of dollars every single year. That's what Democrats and Republicans should be agreeing on. We should be able to come together and say, let's stop this immediately. Another thing that I find outrageous is that Democrats under the Biden administration passed $7.5 billion in spending to build 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations all over the country, whether Americans wanted them or not. But only 8 of these electric vehicle charging stations even got built. I think that should have been in your top 25 list, because where's that money? Honestly, where is that money? That's a great question. Some other things that I'd like to bring up to you here is GOA estimates that total fraud in these programs for unemployment insurance, and you were just talking about it, during the pandemic is at least $60 billion. Americans all over the country will never forget that Democrats shut our country down, shut our businesses down. People got fired. Their churches was closed. All their rights were taken away, and $60 billion from the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor has still not developed an anti-fraud strategy, even though $60 billion is missing. Also, the Medicare program and scale of Medicare spending is innately high risk, with the program spending an estimated $1 trillion in 2024. Of that, in fiscal year 2024, we saw roughly, I'll go back to improper payments again, $54.3 billion in improper payments. And we have Democrats crying over Elon Musk. Are you kidding me? The American people, the polling is out, 72% Democrats and Republicans support DOJ. Support it, 72%. They are not upset about anything that Elon Musk is doing. As a matter of fact, they're happy. They want their 50, they want all these improper payments, all of this waste, they want it back. Now, here's what's really interesting to me. Despite this significant progress made since GOA's 2023 high-risk update, thank you for that, USPS remains unable to fund its services and employee obligations. That's outrageous. Private companies have to be able to fund everything they do, but the United States Postal Service still can't do it. Now, the big one, the Department of Defense Financial Management first appeared on the high-risk list in 1995. 1995. Hey, I graduated from high school in 1992. That's a long time ago. Now, and it remains on this list 28 years later. 28 years later, Congress hasn't fixed this. The Department of Defense hasn't fixed this. And last year, the Pentagon, with a budget of around $850 billion, failed its 7th straight audit. What are we doing? What are we doing? We should be at the most bipartisan time in history where Republicans and Democrats can come together and say the American people's money is being stolen, it is being lost, it is outright treason to treat the American people this way. Mr. Dodaro, I'm sorry. Let me ask you this question. And I would feel, I can't imagine all the things you all have seen in your work. Do you disagree with the effort of DOJ?
There's probably nobody in the government that wants the government to be more efficient and effective than we do at the GAO, and I do personally.
Mm-hmm.
That's our job, to help do that, and we've worked many, many years in order to bring about those changes. So yes. Now, there's a couple of bipartisan things that you touched on that I think you and your committee, this committee could do. One is we've recommended that they make, in order to stop paying dead people, the Social Security master death file is given to Treasury, but only for a 3-year period. They've already saved millions of dollars. Congress needs to make it permanent. You could save hundreds of millions of dollars if that's done.
Can I get information from your team
Absolutely.
afterward? Okay, that'd be
Absolutely.
great.
And it
what
took-
about
it took-
identity verification?
Identity verification needs to be more automated, and we have recommendations for that to occur in the unemployment insurance area. Actually, the unemployment insurance estimate on fraud we made was $100 billion to $135 billion.
Wow.
The other thing that could be done on a bipartisan basis is that the statute of limitations to go after the fraudsters needs to be extended from 5 to 10 years. Congress did it for the Paycheck Protection Program, but not for unemployment insurance. It's almost due to expire. So if Congress doesn't act soon, some of the fraudsters are likely to get away because they'll be outside the statute of limitations. So those things are really important. And I think should be bipartisan.
I agree. I think my time's up. Thank you, Mr. Dodaro.
Thank you. And ranking member pointed out, we've gone over a little bit on the last two on our side. If someone feels the need to go over, I'm keeping up with the time, so we'll make it all work out. Chair recognizes Mr. Subramaniam. Oh, Ms. Brown. Chair recognizes Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Chairman Comer, and thank you to Mr. Dodaro for joining us today. This administration claims to care about rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse, but the facts tell a very different story. So I just want to set the record straight. On week 1, President Trump fired 17 inspectors general. These are the folks who work on behalf of the people, Republicans and Democrats, regardless of party affiliation or who is in the White House. They are the watchdogs who root out government waste, fraud, and abuse, day in and day out. Last year, they identified nearly $100 billion in potential savings. If Donald Trump and Elon Musk cared about cracking down on waste, they would be talking to these auditors, not firing them right out of the gate. Meanwhile, the Government Accountability Office provides cost-cutting recommendations that save taxpayers $40 billion each year. So if Trump was serious about efficiency, it would focus on implementing the thousands of outstanding GAO recommendations, including the 38 areas on the high-risk list. But that's not what's happening. Instead, Trump created the redundant Department of Government Efficiency, putting his billionaire campaign donor, Elon Musk, who just so happens to be a government contractor, in charge. That's not efficiency. That's corruption dressed up as reform. Doge's record so far: overstated claims, receipts that don't add up, lies about condoms in Gaza, lies about 130-year-olds on Social Security, an $8 billion contract that was really $8 million. Can somebody say, oops? Doge claims to have saved $55 billion. Well, the Wall Street Journal, Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal, crunched the numbers this weekend and found just $2.6 billion in savings, mostly from canceled contracts and cuts in research funding for things like Alzheimer's and chronic lung disease. Which brings me to my questions. Mr. Dodaro, how does the GAO define government waste?
Waste is defined as extravagant spending or something that doesn't really add any value in terms of the government's overall accomplishment of goals.
Thank you. And based on that definition, would eliminating the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau qualify as cutting waste or making a policy choice?
That's basically a value judgment and a policy choice. in order to do that. I mean, that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In my district, a federal grant to train teachers in underserved urban schools was terminated solely because it was labeled as a DEI initiative. Is this cutting waste or making a policy choice?
Waste to one person is not waste to another person. I mean, but these are basically value judgments that are made and based on policy preferences.
In your testimony, you mentioned that 20 of the 38 areas on the high-risk list in part are due to skills gaps or inadequate number of staff. Would indiscriminately firing probationary staff make it more or less likely that government addresses waste, fraud, and abuse?
Yeah, I answered this question earlier. I said it was doubtful.
Doubtful. Thank you. In your testimony, it highlights that the gross tax gap, which is the difference between taxes owed and taxes paid on time. Can you remind us what the tax gap was in 2022?
Oh, I'd have to go back and take a look at what it was in 2022, but it's been about the same as a percent of the economy over time. Even though the numbers have grown, as a percent of GDP, it's about the same.
What would that percentage be?
I'd have to.
All right, let me just move on to my next question.
Yeah, I'll provide that for the record. I have it.
So I'm going to step out on a limb and say it's about $700 billion a year that American taxpayers are being robbed of, roughly, and that sure sounds like a lot of waste to me. Now, would firing some 6,000 IRS workers lead to more or less of that waste?
Yeah, it depends on what their jobs are. At the IRS, but you basically, they need more revenue agents, they need more training, they need people for customer service. So you'd have to look at what functions those people do and decide whether or not they're important or not.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And let me just clarify, high-income individuals are among the most notorious tax cheats. And these are the same people Republicans want to reward with a $4.5 trillion tax cut at the expense of Medicaid, veterans benefits, and food assistance for children and seniors. And that's what this is really all about. DOGE isn't about saving money, y'all. It's about consolidating power and ensuring that the rich get richer. So from where I sit, it looks like Trump and Elon Musk aren't fighting waste. They're just ensuring that the waste benefits the wealthy. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, thanks. Good to see you again. You know a lot of things about a lot of things. So I'm going to go somewhere where at least it has been bipartisan, and I hope just by talking about it, that doesn't destroy that, because we got a lot of work to do. The federal government owns about 250,000 buildings and structures, about $2 billion square feet of office space. A study by your agency recently indicated 17 of the 24 agencies reviewed used 25% or less of their headquarters office space. Even at their high mark, 24 federal agencies, of 24 federal agencies, none of them use more than 49%. We got more than 11,000 acres of old, unused buildings, and the American taxpayer, they're forced to pay $2 billion a year for office space that sits empty. 80% of leases are going to expire in the next 5 years. I don't know if you're looking to take a contractor job after you leave this rat race, but maybe that's something you're interested in. GA reported just this year that real property management was downgraded from MET to partially MET. Now, I think you're familiar with the thing called the Use It Act, which we passed out of that committee, bipartisan. Not easy, but bipartisan, and alongside OMB's benchmark, we'd like to remedy this situation of $2 billion a year for more than 11,000 acres of old, unused office space. I mean, that's more than half the size of Disney World, just like sitting there empty, but we're paying for it. You know a lot of things. what would be your recommendation to Congress and to OPM to speed up the implementation process? As you know, most of these agencies don't want to give any of it up, even though they're not using it, right? But they don't want to give any of it up. So what do we do? Each one, Congress and OMB.
Yeah, Dave Maroney's here. He did the study that you referenced. I'll let him explain in a minute. But the one thing I would say that Congress needs to do is to make sure that there's lessons learned. Congress tried to expedite this by creating a board, and the board was to identify properties for sale. They had 3 rounds. It barely made a dent in anything. They weren't in sync with OMB. There's no lessons learned. That's why we downgraded them. There's still not a process to dispose of federal real property quickly and expeditiously, and Congress can create that and set milestones. I think it's very good that you set benchmarks for utilization of the buildings that we keep, but we got to get rid of a lot of buildings.
We've
that
set
we
the
need.
benchmarks, right? But we have agencies that can't meet them or won't meet them or don't meet them.
Well, I think
but they
you
still
have-
want to hang on to them.
Yeah, but you got to get rid of some of the properties, and Dave can enumerate.
Yes, well, setting the benchmark is an important point in the law you referenced. There's also, within a year, the measurements requiring OMB and GSA to start notifying agencies if they have extra space. But I think you can do it once those measurements are in place. How many people are coming in to these buildings on a daily basis? Use those measurements to say, okay, we have extra space, and then the agencies need to expeditiously move forward. OMB has a role there to ensure that they're setting appropriate timeframes for agencies to respond if they're not doing it on their own. Congress has a role in your oversight of the implementation of the Use It Act. And as the Comptroller General mentioned as well, taking a look at the disposal process for once owned buildings are going into the pipeline to be gotten rid of, looking at ways to shorten it, make it less complicated. We have noted for years that it is a complex, complicated process. It takes too long. And the reform process, the FASTA process, was an attempt to look at ways to do that. Your legislation has extended the life of FASTA, so it's an opportunity really to take lessons not only on what properties can we dispose of, but how can we do it more quickly, because there is a lot of extra space.
So are you saying it requires more legislation from us regarding the standards and the process? Is that what it requires, or can this be done by the agency like GSA? Can they do this on their own? And you know, even though we want them to divest, sometimes they don't. And even though we give them a timeline, the timelines keep slipping. So then what?
So I think having the data now, as you know from that report for your subcommittee, prior to that, there was not even data on utilization outside of headquarters buildings, very limited to know. So it's hard to tell how much space you need if you're not actually measuring it. That legislation will now require the collection of that data for both owned and leased space throughout the country. That's what's really important for the agencies to take a look at that data and OMB to be there to push, to say, okay, if you are extra, if you have more than you need, start getting rid of it.
Would it be an impoundment if OMB just said, look, you have extra, you're not utilizing it, we're paying for X and we're not paying for the rest? As a forcing function?
Yeah,
Like,
no. What I think needs to be done, there's a federal building fund. In order to dispose of some of this property, you need to fix it up sometimes and make it available.
well, we didn't get into the
sale.
backlog of maintenance and
Right.
the cost and all that.
Right, but in this case, though, Congress has been using the federal building fund for other purposes. So I think we have to come to grips with, if you want to.
Unbelievable, right, that they would do that.
Nothing shocks me after being in this job for so long. But, I mean, we have to get in sync. And the other thing Congress ought to do is make sure that wherever the extension of FASTA is, they work in concert with OMB and GSA. Last time they were working in parallel, they weren't working together.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. I yield.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dodaro, thank you for being here today and sharing with this committee this year's high-risk list. This, of course, is the list that the Government Accountability Office puts out every year that lays out the government programs most at risk for waste, fraud, and abuse and recommends ways to improve them. If that sounds familiar, it's because that's what DOJ is pretending to do. But the work that GAO does isn't pretend, and they produce benefits at an average of $40 billion each year. Mr. Dodaro, your time at GAO goes back more than 50 years, as you told us, so it's fair to say that you have a lot of experience with this list and the GAO's work, correct? Thank you. I have
Yes.
just a few yes or no questions. They're not value judgments. Yes or no questions about some of the contents of the high-risk list. One of the areas identified in this list is the need to provide veterans with better and more timely health care. Does your report recommend improving veteran health care by cutting more than 1,000 jobs?
By what?
By cutting more than 1,000 jobs.
No, it does not.
Thank you. How about the USDA? Does your report recommend firing the workers tackling the bird flu outbreak?
No.
Another major area your list identifies is IT and cybersecurity improvement. Does your list recommend anywhere that the federal government start bypassing security protocols and installing outside and unvetted software?
No.
Is cutting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs recommended anywhere in your report?
No, we don't discuss those issues. Yeah,
So no.
That does it. No, that's not a topic in the report.
So it's not there.
Right.
Thank you. Those are all actions taken by Elon Musk and Doge wrecking crew, and it's not surprising that none of it is actually doing anything to improve waste, fraud, and abuse. It's also not surprising that none of Musk's billions in government contracts have been cut. Yet none of the actions by Trump and Musk have helped the American people. Eggs are still expensive. So expensive that Waffle House has added a surcharge, and thousands of hardworking federal workers across the country have lost their jobs. Slashing all the funding for programs and services now is only going to lead to more inefficiencies and more costs later. The GAO literally has a blueprint of what to do to save billions. The high-risk list is reported out every year. We have a hearing on it every year, yet Trump and Musk are ignoring these reports. Instead, they're gutting our government programs and services to root out waste and to fix our $36 trillion debt crisis. In reality, Trump and Musk want all of us to pay for a massive $4.5 trillion tax giveaway to the mega rich. Make no mistake, $4.5 trillion tax giveaway is government spending, and it will balloon the deficit. If Republicans want to be serious about tackling our debt, they should start there. Start by putting the American people ahead of the pocketbooks of their billionaire elite friends. Thank you again for your time, Mr. Dodaro. I yield back to the ranking member.
I thank my colleague, and I echo what she has just said. Mr. Dodaro, the inspectors general are an important part of accountability, transparency, efficiency, and oversight of the federal government in a broad scope. Does firing 17 of those inspectors general help with government efficiency?
No, I think the firing
Speak up,
was,
please. I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. No. I think it was very unfortunate. I think we lost a lot of institutional knowledge and expertise with those firings. You know, when there were some inspector generals fired back in the first Trump administration, you know, I issued a report talking about the importance of independent inspectors general and recommended that the Congress add some provisions, the 30-day notice period, because the inspector generals also report to the Congress. They're a very unique part of our government system. Even though they're in the executive branch, I don't dispute the president's authority to fire them, but there should have been notice of 30 days given and specific reasons for the firings. But it's important to have independent IGs.
It should be performance-based, and there has to be cause. Otherwise, we are jeopardizing the independence of the inspectors general. I thank my colleague for yielding.
Chair now recognizes the next governor of Florida for 5 minutes.
I actually appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Mr. Dodaro, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being back. Since 2003, federal agencies have reported about $2.8 trillion in improper payments, including over the last 7 years consecutively, at a minimum, $150 billion in each one of those years. The high-risk report mentions that the Department of Agriculture, HHS, HUD, DHS, OPM, and SBA all failed to report improper payment estimates in FY 2023. And to reiterate for the American people, we have 7 agencies of the federal government that have not reported on their improper payments. And if memory serves, the last report GAO issued had improper payments north of $240 billion that was reported. What are some of the real issues within the federal government for the lack of ability for these agencies to report on improper payments within their purview?
I think there needs to be more pressure put on those agencies by the administrations that are in place. And I've talked to the prior administrations about this. And the Congress needs to demand that the law be followed and they do improper payment estimates. I mean, I think it's not good management to not know how much you're paying that you shouldn't be paying. It's not good fiscal stewardship. So I'm very disappointed they're not reporting, and I would encourage the Congress and the Trump administration to require the reporting now.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly. Let me answer the question. The agencies that didn't report, some of them vary in size. Obviously, Department of Homeland Security is a major department of the federal government.
Right.
Considering that, let's just say for estimate's sake, I don't have the report in front of me, that in fiscal year of 23, improper payments were $250 billion. If we had the estimates of those 7 departments, what do you think the actual outstanding was from 2023?
Yeah, I really can't hesitate to guess. The one thing Congress needs to do in this area, though, the temporary assistance for needy families, they believe, HHS, they can't make an estimate unless Congress changes the law. So they refuse to do it, saying they don't have the legal authority to require the states to give them the information they need in order to make an improper payment estimate. So Congress needs to change the statute there, and I think that's important.
All right, thank you. FEMA is currently managing over 600 major disaster declarations, some of which have occurred 20 years ago. One of the GAO recommendations is in this year's high-risk report is that FEMA should identify and document lessons learned related to estimating obligations for catastrophic disasters. Can you expand upon this?
Yeah, I'll ask Mr. Curry's our expert.
Sure. Mr. Curry, thank you.
Sure. FEMA's always struggled with this because they don't know how much they're going to need in a particular year. And then when you have a catastrophic disaster season like you had last year in your home state with Helene and Milton, that throws everything off. But COVID really threw this off because FEMA did not expect to spend what it spent on COVID. At the end of this year, it's going to have spent well north of $150 billion on COVID. And what that's done is it's sort of thrown all the estimates off. It's gone up over time, which affects their estimates moving forward. And they're spent way more than they thought they were going to have to spend on that. And that's one of the reasons that the Disaster Relief Fund is in this constant negative situation. It's supposed to be, actually it's going to be $12 billion underwater already at the end of September, even after the supplemental appropriation that you all provided it late last year. So FEMA's
not to cut you off, but to go down this line of that we're talking about, is FEMA still having to make payments out associated with COVID-19?
Absolutely, they're still making payments.
Do you have an estimate of how much FEMA is still appropriating out because of COVID-19?
Well, last time I checked, which was at the end of February, they were upwards of $130 billion they'd have paid out, and they expect to spend over $150 billion at the end of fiscal year. They also told us they expect the disaster to run through the end of FY26 next year and spend almost $180 billion on that. So they're still reimbursing state and local governments for that.
Okay, so they're expected to spend another $180 billion reimbursing state and local governments for COVID-19, and that's a stretch?
Sorry, another $50 billion.
Oh, another $50 billion to take it to $180 billion.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I'm out of my time. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, thank you for your time and your service.
Chair recognizes Mr. Subramaniam.
Subramaniam, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry.
That's okay. Before we go on to this, someone had said earlier that we cannot cut Medicaid here in Congress, and I just want to make sure everyone knows at home that that's not true. In fact, my state, this Republican budget, which it does, would cut Medicaid benefits even a little bit. Everyone who benefited from Medicaid expansion in Virginia would actually lose that benefit, and so it would hurt us and many other states, millions of people across the country. But moving on, thank you, Mr. Dodaro, for coming. I was actually, I saw in the news that Doge had a savings dashboard online. Have you seen this savings dashboard, this website? It's doge.gov.
I have not.
/savings?
No.
Okay, well, I have it up here. It says, let's balance the budget. Doge's total estimated savings are $65 billion. But I'd like to enter into the record this article, February 25th, from the New York Times. Doge quietly deletes the 5 biggest spending cuts it celebrated last week. The subtitle is, "The cuts highlighted on an earlier version of the wall of receipts contained mistakes that vastly inflated the amount of money saved." How much money do you think Doge is actually saving? Do you have just an estimate?
I don't know.
You don't really know? I don't know either. In fact, a lot of us don't know. We really want to ask them. It would be really nice if we could. Have you met with anyone at Doge or Elon Musk?
I have not. No. We have had a couple of our people meet with some Doge people at the Treasury Department to talk about our audits of the general fund of the Treasury. Since we audit the federal government's financial statements, we also audit the general fund, which is all the cash payment systems over there, too. They had some questions about our report. That's the extent of it so far. We have a number of requests from Congress to begin looking at their access to systems, and we will begin that work at a number of agencies across government.
I've sent a lot of letters. Do you think, have they responded to any of your requests so far?
We're just getting started.
You're just getting, have you sent any actual requests to them?
We've asked for an entrance meeting at the Treasury Department, and so we expect to.
What do they say?
Well, we're in the process. As far as I know, we're not having any.
Okay. I tried to get into the Treasury Department. They wouldn't let me in. So.
Yeah, well, we're their auditors.
I guess that makes sense, but I'm a member of Congress, so that's why I was confused.
I expect and anticipate cooperation.
Interesting. And so just going on, I've heard a lot that this is about addressing the federal debt. And if you got rid of every single federal civil servant, how much of the federal debt would that actually pay down? Like, what do you think percentage?
Yeah, the total federal payroll is less than 10% of the federal government's expenditures. Even the problem with our debt is you could eliminate almost the entire discretionary part of the budget, which is about 20, and still not really make an impact long-term on the deficit path that we're on right now. I mean, you're 36 trillion, in debt right now. The debt to GDP ratio from debt held by the public as a percent of gross domestic product this year will be 100%. In our entire history, it's only been 106% during World War II.
Sure.
Absent any change in fiscal policy, by 2050, it'll be over 200% of debt to GDP ratio. The only way to deal with this is to deal with the main driver, which is healthcare costs. Now, you can make you can make inroads. You can make inroads, but in terms of
but I would just say, so you would I would conclude from that then that this effort isn't actually doing much, if anything, to reduce the federal deficit, to reduce our federal debt. In fact, it's a drop in the bucket, I would say. And now let's look at what the federal civil servants who are being fired en masse, being targeted en masse, are actually doing. They're firing nuclear safety experts. Accidentally, they're trying to call them back. They can't even find some of their emails. They deleted all their contact info. They fired the staff researching bird flu, actually, which is very relevant today. They cut FDA, NIH, and CDC staff. Some of the high-risk projects that you're talking about, the staff that's integral to implementing a lot of your recommendations were actually fired. And then even the website I was just talking about, this wall of receipts, they actually messed that up too. They said that they cut about $8 billion at ICE, but it was actually $8 million. And then that's setting aside the fact that they gave accidentally, perhaps, self-proclaimed racists actually read and write access to the critical treasury data that includes almost every American's personal information. And so I just doesn't seem like this is actually a very good, if they're trying to cut the deficit, if they're trying to get rid of waste, fraud, abuse, they're doing a really bad job, it sounds like. Thank you. I yield my time.
Chair recognizes Mr. Burleson from Missouri.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's good to see you again. I will be sad when after you leave. you had mentioned in the previous conversation the debt to GDP ratio at nearly 100%, but according to the debt clock at 36 trillion, with a GDP of 29.6 trillion, we're actually at 123%.
Well, if you count, I'm counting just debt held by the public. The 36 includes debt that we owe to ourselves and intergovernmental transfers like back to Social Security and Medicare trust funds. So you're right. If you use gross debt, I'm using just debt held by the
And
public.
over the next 10 years, we're planning to add another 20 trillion on the current spend level, correct?
Yeah.
So at what point do we end up in a situation where the interest, we can't make the interest payments?
I think this is the big issue. And I've said we have tremendous interest rate exposure because we borrow short term. So we're always refinancing the debt that we had before. We never pay down anything.
And rates are going up.
And rates are going up, and that's what's happened. The interest on the debt in 2023 was $352 billion. This year it'll be $1 trillion. So, compound interest works well when you're saving, but not when you're borrowing.
Yeah, and that's why, for me, the alarming number was seeing that the growth in the interest payments from last year to this year has been near over $200 billion.
Yes.
Just in the growth.
Right.
So when we're talking about a reconciliation package, if you're just going to cover the growth in the interest payments, you need to find savings of at least $2 trillion over the next 10 years, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is a big problem.
It is a really big problem, and I would really welcome if our Democratic colleagues would recognize this is not a Republican problem, it's not a Democrat problem, this is a math problem. This is a serious thing that I think we only have maybe a few years, a handful of years left to correct this before we end up in a debt spiral.
Absolutely. And you're also going to confront the depletion of the Social Security Trust Fund and the Medicare
in
Part A
approximately
Trust Fund.
8 years?
Yes.
8 to 11 years.
Yeah, and it depends on, the trustees' estimates will be out in another couple of months, and I wouldn't be surprised if those dates are moved up a tad.
So if we're having a mandatory spending conversation, and this is what my question to you is that if, as someone who doesn't, and I think that we universally, even though we're going to be criticized as though we're trying to kick people off of Medicaid, if the goal is not to kick anybody off of Medicaid that needs it, what are the different solutions that are in our toolbox where we could eliminate improper pay? I would hope to think that Democrats are not opposed to eliminating improper payments in Medicaid.
No.
Right? One would hope. One would hope that they would not be opposed to finding fraudsters or people that are, that are not supposed to be receiving the benefits. One would hope that you would want to find ways of getting the best bang for your buck within the program. So, for example, and that's what I want to kind of drill down to. At the end of the day, this is the healthcare industry and the costs of healthcare that the federal government is having to deal with Medicaid and Medicare and even the insurance on the lives of the federal workforce, correct?
Yes.
So what can we do? Have you guys seen anything that can be done that would actually have an impact in driving down healthcare costs?
Yeah, this is the compound problem because you got healthcare costs going up faster than the economy, and you have the demographics are working against us because they're older people that are hitting the payroll. It's just a combination of both things.
And then I wanted to,
Sure.
if you could answer this before my time runs out,
Sure.
within your answer, I noticed there was a study that was done in 2019. I'm hoping that you have new studies that indicated when you studied the impact that PBMs had and whether or not that money was actually, the savings was actually coming back to the federal government or to the, and if there's new data, because at that time it was 96% that was coming back in savings. So
On the PBM issue, I'm going to have to get back to you on how much, we are doing some current work in that area. In terms of what would drive down, so the way you pay for services, you know, the responsibility of the patients for cost sharing, those are the types of things where the government could take some action. So for example, we've had a longstanding recommendation, you all have considered this in multiple Congresses, of making sure that Medicare and other payers are paying the same for services, whether they're delivered in the physician office or in the hospital outpatient department setting. The most recent CBO score of that, which they put
Site
out-
neutrality is what you're
yeah,
saying.
budget neutrality, I mean, site neutrality, yes. So that, the most recent score of that is $151 billion in savings over 10 years. And that has impacts on the entire healthcare system. So it's not even just savings within Medicare, it will have an impact on other programs as well as the private sector healthcare system. So there's lots of examples like that of paying differently for services. That,
Can you provide those examples to me?
yeah,
Yes,
of
yeah,
course.
we'll do that. There's also the adjustments that are made every year between fee-for-service in Medicare and Medicare Advantage. And the committee, the legislative commission set up by the Congress,
sorry.
I appoint the members to this MedPAC for Medicare, one for Medicaid. In the MedPAC area, they estimate that there's overpayments being made to the managed care portion of like $40 billion.
That's correct.
And so we have recommendations to make that a fair comparison, so we're not overpaying.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Miss Ansari from Arizona. Mrs.
Thank you. Sorry, I thought since Representative Frost was back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, you said today that, quote, there is a need for change, but how we does so matters. I couldn't agree with you more. We absolutely need to ensure that our government and its agencies and programs are running efficiently and free of waste so that we can deliver for the American people. We need to make sure seniors are getting their Social Security checks on time so they can pay their rent and have food on the table. But meanwhile, Elon Musk is spreading brazen lies that tens of millions of dead Americans are receiving checks, and he's going after our personal data. We need to make sure we're getting correct tax returns so that Americans depend and can respond in a timely manner. But President Trump just fired 6,700 IRS employees in the middle of tax season, as you know. And we need to ensure that Americans on Medicare continue using telehealth services, which is essential for rural communities and seniors. But the president is shutting that service down as well in April. They fired over 1,000 VA employees that our veterans depend on for essential healthcare services and their hard-earned benefits. Not only that, but they enacted a hiring freeze for this agency that already has a shortage of doctors and nurses. And I know you confirmed this earlier today as well. There's also been a lot of talk about polling from my colleagues from the other side of the aisle. So I'd also like to cite recent polling on this issue. In 2 recent polls, when respondents were asked whether they approved or disapproved of the job that Elon Musk is doing within the federal government, there was a 34% approval compared to a 49% disapproval. That poll was carried between February 13th and the 18th. It also found that 52% of Americans disapprove of Musk shutting down federal programs that he deems unnecessary. And in another poll, only 28% believe that Musk's role in the government is a, quote, good thing. So Americans are fed up with the corruption. They know that none of what is happening is about addressing waste, fraud, and abuse, the new buzzword. It's about saving a buck to hand off to billionaires. So, Mr. Dodaro, thank you again for being here. Few questions for you. Do you believe that firing 6,700 IRS employees reduces waste and makes tax filing more efficient?
No.
Thank you. Does the high-risk list recommend the dismantling of USAID, the Department of Education, or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau?
Do we recommend that? No, we've not recommended that.
And did Elon Musk or Doge consult with you and your team to decide who to fire and who gets to keep their jobs?
No.
So the independent, nonpartisan office, your office, dedicated to research how the federal government can increase efficiency, and I've heard a lot of praise from both sides, which is deserved, your the GAO was not in any way, shape, or form consulted by the Trump administration or Elon Musk before they made sweeping decisions to fire thousands of government employees, dismantle agency, or overstep Congress to do so.
The point of clarification I would make is, since we're an independent, nonpartisan organization in the legislative branch, it's really not our role to be consulted on personnel decisions in the executive branch. We give advice on what kind of functions, the operations of the government, but we don't, make recommendations about specific individuals and personnel decisions. That's left to them. But what we do look at is whether or not decisions like that were made in accordance with law and merit principles. And there's also the Merit Systems Protection Board and the Office of Special Counsel and the Fair Labor Relations Board. So there are a number of entities within their independent agencies that are supposed to focus on the personnel process and whether people are treated fairly.
Thank you. That clarification is helpful. It's overall extremely alarming to me that you were not consulted in such sweeping, rapid changes that have come about. Your recommendations, as you said, many of them have been around for years and still remain an issue that we very much should be tackling. But the corruption of Doge and Elon Musk, and to a point that's already been said, if they are, if they believe what they are doing is correct and they are tackling these issues for the American people, I welcome them to come here and speak to us as well. So thank you again so much.
Chair now recognizes Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Dodaro, for your service, and I wish you the best in retirement. Our country's in big trouble, $36 trillion in debt. We should be sounding the alarms all over the place on both sides of the aisle if it was $1 trillion. If you spend more money per day in your household than you make per day, you'd be out on the street. And if you were a business and you spend more than you bring in per day, you'd be out of business. If the government was a business...
Please talk into the microphone there so they can
If the government was a business, it would be out of business. Again, I talk about $36 trillion as the biggest national security issue in our country. I heard folks on the other side of the aisle talk about DEI. If you had a list of things you would do if you wanted to destroy our country, you would have open borders. You would have 103,000 people a year die from fentanyl overdose from this Chinese chemical warfare, fentanyl being produced in China and coming across our border. You would have these foreign wars. You would spend more money than you make, things that didn't happen during Trump's first administration. I heard them talk about DEI. You know what DEI stands for? Didn't earn it. Plus, it's illegal discrimination, and it destroys efficiency. Equal opportunity is okay, but equal outcome is Marxist. Instead of focusing on waste, fraud, and abuse over the last last 4 years, we were focused on these divisive, woke ideologies. When you're doing business with foreign countries, they say, when we work with America's competitors, they say, we want to build a bridge. They talk about building a bridge. When America comes to their town, they want to talk about these woke ideologies. It's ridiculous. And I heard it said that Trump is not serious about being efficient. Well, we talk about the fentanyl that's killing all these American people dead, 103,000 a year. Well, border crossings are now down in just a short period of time, 95%, from 2,000 border crossings per day to about 200 border crossings a day. I would say that's pretty efficient. His recruitment is up in the military, the highest it's been in 11 years. I'd say that's pretty efficient. I mean, if we don't have young men and women willing to step up and volunteer and protect our nation, we will not have a nation. He's also got his appointees through the Senate just about faster than any president in history. I'd say that's pretty darn efficient. And when you're $36 trillion of debt and it's getting worse, I don't say we're at the cliff, we're over the cliff. And by the grace of God, President Trump and Elon Musk and everybody else wants to pull us back and save this country. I think every major nation in history that went under was because of bankruptcy. He got the hostages returns, several hostages, American hostages, returned in record time. So I would say President Trump definitely cares about efficiency. What shocks me is that the left is outraged at Elon Musk and all these people that are fighting so hard to discover waste, fraud, and abuse and save our country, but they're not outraged at the people that committed the waste, fraud, and abuse. And that just shocks me. I find it concerning that says 2003 federal agencies have reported about $2.8 trillion in estimated improper payments. The GAO issued a biennial report at the start of each Congress to identify which programs are vulnerable to fraud, waste, and abuse and mismanagement. So, Mr. Dodaro, are there any common themes or problems that you have noticed across the high-risk areas when compiling this list in recent years?
Yes, there's a number of areas that we've been adding to the list involve multiple agencies to have to work together in order to address it. And one of them is on point to your point about fentanyl. We added drug misuse as a high-risk area because there needed to be a better national strategy that pulled together federal departments and agencies, but also work at the state and local level, work with law enforcement, work with treatment facilities and others. And so that's an area that requires multiple agencies to work together. So that's one of the patterns that we've seen, over time.
Well, I would say the American people, we the people, are sick and tired of being ripped off. And in just 5 weeks, Doge, Elon Musk, and his genius team, and by the way, the guy's the richest man in the world. He doesn't need our money. And President Trump is the only president in recent history I've ever heard of that left office with less money. Every other president has left office with more money. But we have got to make some good decisions. Our country's in really big trouble. When we talk about FEMA, Hurricane Helene impacted my district as well. And I was just struck by how farmers and volunteers all across our Commonwealth and all across our nation jumped in to help people. What are some things that we can do? Like I've heard it proposed that FEMA, some of the FEMA duties can be returned to the governors. What do you think we can do to handle these natural disasters more efficiently?
Yeah, I think one thing would be to determine at what level, the state and local levels, they're already the first responders. And FEMA gives grants for them to be better prepared. But we've always said, well, how prepared are they? And they've never been able to tell us over time. I'll let Chris Curry.
All right, last question real quick.
All right.
What is the definition of insanity?
Well, the common definition that's used is keep repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Yes, so we have to move quickly. I don't know if you know who Mr. Wonderful is, Kevin O'Leary, very successful businessman. He's on CNN. He's saying that Doge should move faster than it's moving and should cut 20% more. And then you rebuild from there because we are in drastic times, desperate times require desperate measures. Thank you very much.
All right.
Yield back.
We'll provide answers on FEMA for the record.
Chair recognizes Mr. Frost.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dodaro, thank you so much for being here today. The GAO, Government Accountability Office, is really important, thoughtful, expert reports that help us save billions of dollars every year, and I thank you for that work and thank your staff for that work. The GAO couldn't be more different than Trump and Elon Musk's Doge. Trump and Musk want to rip away the vital services that millions of Americans depend on. He's doing it just to find money to give tax cuts to the richest people in this country and largest corporations in this country, many of whom pay a less effective tax rate than a lot of the teachers in my district. Doge will save nothing for the American people while making everything worse for us, while trying to find room to give tax cuts to the richest people in this country. Shamefully, those cuts include cuts to our military veterans, including the nearly 32,000 veterans that I proudly represent. And I take this subject personally because I'm the son of a veteran. I come from an Air Force family. How my family's been there for so long, they were in it when it was the Army Air Corps. And so I take this very personally. Mr. Dodaro, VA healthcare is on the GAO's high-risk list. How have staffing challenges at the VA contributed to this?
And I'll ask Ms. Farb to come up, but they've contributed to it very significantly. Jess?
I would say, we talked about this a little bit earlier in terms of scheduling appointments for veterans, both in the VA facilities and in the community, providing treatments that are needed and timely care, which VA has had problems with in the past, as we all know. So not having the staff that they need to kind of continue on the path to making sure that veterans get timely access to quality
So a
care.
staff capacity issue, not enough.
Yes, well, not a right type. I mean, I'm very concerned about the mental health area. And they don't have enough behavioral mental health people, particularly for rural veterans.
100%.
And the suicide prevention areas is another area. You know, the last I checked, there were 17 veterans a day die by suicide. It's a national disgrace, in my opinion, that we're not better supporting these people, which is why I added it to the high-risk list. And so they need doctors, nurses, they need the proper care, and also the proper handoff if they go to the community care process as well. So it's an issue that we need to be very careful on how we handle and make sure it's done properly.
I 100% agree with you. I was actually about to ask you about the VA's need to hire more psychiatrists and psychologists, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
Right.
You know, last week I held a veterans town hall in my district at my local VA. There were a few hundred people that showed up. Folks came very confused, very angry, and very scared. They asked questions. I have some of them down. They asked, will I lose my benefits? Who staffs Doge, and what are they doing with my personal medical information? Will budget cuts mean that I'll have longer wait times? Why is my health care being sacrificed to politics? These are the questions people ask me, my constituents, veterans ask me. Among the 18 inspectors general that Donald Trump illegally fired, which, by the way, Congress was supposed to be notified before an IG is fired like that. Maybe but 2 hours ago, Republicans in this committee took a vote to silence me because I said Donald Trump was engaging in grifting. But complete crickets when he breaks the law and completely circumvents Congress and doesn't tell us about the firing of 18 inspectors general. How will the firing of the inspector general of the VA make it harder to address the issues that my constituents, the veterans in my district raised?
I responded earlier that I thought it was unfortunate those IGs were fired. I think we lost a lot of institutional and expertise in that area. We've worked very closely with Mike Missile over the years and the other IGs. Now, they have a very talented group of people. They'll soldier on, and they'll continue to do the job, but it was unfortunate. And, you know, I had recommended to the Congress to make the change to require the 30-day notice and to give for cause, because the inspector generals do report to the Congress as well as to the head of the agency. It's a very unique responsibility, and Congress should have the opportunity to engage in a dialogue on that. I don't dispute the president's authority to fire them, but how it's done and follow the proper procedures, I believe, is important.
Thank you. The Orlando VA healthcare system already suffers from critical staffing shortages. I mean, the people there, who a large percentage of them are veterans themselves, are doing a great job. They're doing what they need to do, but they don't have the staff capacity necessary to be able to meet the demand, to be able to live up to our promise to people who put their lives on the line for the safety and security of this country. And that's something I take very seriously. It's something that a lot of my Republican colleagues used to take very seriously, but times change. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Gill from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing today. I'd like to start by addressing a few of the concerns that our colleagues have had on the other side of the aisle about the Doge movement and Elon Musk in particular. And first, they're telling us that what Doge and Elon Musk are doing by firing federal workers, many of whom aren't showing up to work to begin with, is somehow cruel. And I'd like to say that perhaps what is actually cruel is bankrupting our country by funding a federal workforce that isn't working. What is cruel is driving up inflation by spending more money than our federal government has, harming working class families across the country. What's cruel is consolidating power in an undemocratic administrative state that doesn't answer to anybody, apparently, if they had their way. You know, no federal worker has a right to work for the U.S. government, but our children do have a birthright to inherit a country that isn't bankrupt. And that is what House Republicans and President Trump and Elon Musk are trying to do by cutting out waste, fraud, and abuse from the federal government. What Elon Musk is doing isn't cruelty, it's altruism. And it's the first time anybody has been able to actually right-size our federal budget, and we should be applauding him regardless of which side of the aisle we sit on. I'd also like to address the idea that Elon Musk and President Trump are somehow corrupt in right-sizing the federal government. If you want to know where the real corruption is, let's look at which side of the aisle has been benefiting from this slush fund that we've been giving out with very little accountability. It tends to be left-wing pet projects, left-wing media like NPR and PBS, who always routinely run cover for Democrats while attacking Republicans. It's left-wing advocacy groups and NGOs that are taking our tax dollars and promoting DEI programs and transgender surgeries and girl-powered climate action, whatever that means. These are all left-wing movements that are being funded by our tax dollars. And it raises the question of how successful would the leftist political movement be in America if it weren't for the fact that their whole movement is subsidized by taxpayers. That is what corruption is. And we're finding out now recently that Stacey Abrams is part of the grift as well. Apparently, the EPA gave $2 billion to a group called Power Forward Communities that was funded in late 2023 and had only reported $100 in total revenue. Power Forward Communities had no business managing a grant that large, of course, but they were appealing for Democrats. The co-chair of Power Forward Communities is Sean Donovan, who previously served as Barack Obama's director of HUD and OMB. And we also know that Stacey Abrams is senior counsel for one of the coalition groups called Renewing America affiliated with this. That is corruption, and that's the waste that we're trying to root out here. They talk a lot about Elon Musk and Doge and having access to American data. Remember, Biden let 53 unpaid researchers and students have full access to the American people's data at the IRS, and there was no outrage then. We're learning now that the Biden IRS leaked taxpayer information. We were told last year that it was only for, I say only, for 70,000 Americans. We're finding out today it was actually 405,000 Americans. That's the kind of access to data that I'm concerned about, and it's being leaked to a left-wing news outlet that's partially funded by George Soros. These are the questions we should be asking and we should be raising. They like to talk, I think, disingenuously and very hyperbolically about President Trump being a dictator. As they know, Article 2 of the Constitution says that the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America, not in a technocratic, undemocratic, unelected administrative state that they've been propping up for so long. We're a republic, not a European-style technocracy. And that's why our country is the global leader and Europe is not. But for decades, we've watched as this administrative state has metastasized and acts with incredible leftist fervor and has no accountability. What President Trump and Elon Musk are doing is returning our country back to its democratic roots, restoring constitutional order in this country, and that's why we should be supporting them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Chair now recognizes Mr. Min. Oh,
Okay.
Am I out of order? Who do I?
Oh, no, that's fine. Mr. Dodaro, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your decades.
Hold on, Mr. Min, I'm sorry. Mr. Conley, who's next?
Ms. Simon is next.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member. I appreciate your testimony today, sir, and thank you as a MPA master's student a few years ago. I spent an awful lot of time reading your reports, and I really, really appreciate the level of professionalism that you've led, and thank you for your service. You know, my colleague, Mr. Frost, you talked a bit about veterans, sir, and I appreciate that. My mother served the Veteran Administration for over 35 years. You know, if you call 415-221-4810, or in Phoenix, 602-277-5511, or in Texas, 713-791-1441. We know now when veterans, mothers of veterans, partners of veterans, when they're calling, there's only 3 of many VAs in the country, folks are not going to answer the phone. On February 14th, this administration fired over 1,000 VA workers. 1,000 VA workers. So, you know, when you cut staff, you cut services. And when you cut services, these are more than just budget decisions. It's a betrayal of the American promise. Our servicemen and women deserve better. They fought in the line of fire with an understanding that when they came home, they would have efficacious health benefits, social services, mental health services. That was our promise. And it's not just in this administration that we've broken our promise. I will say that we've not done what we should have in the past and currently in the present, but to annihilate critical staff supporting critical lives of folks who dedicated their lifespan to this country. It's a betrayal of a lexicon of America First that I am hearing every single day. You know, sir, I don't have a question for you. Again, I'm thanking you. But last week, I visited an NIH-funded clinic. And I know we are not talking so much about NIH in your report. A Nobel Prize-winning scientist and physician scientists on her team and young American students have dedicated their professional careers to ending genetic diseases like sickle cell. They're there. They have a cure. The trials have gone really, really well. They're looking at moving forward treatment for ALS and for folks who have suffered from ALS and have buried your uncles and your mothers and your fathers and your cousins and your nieces. You know the devastation of that disease. For folks who are struggling themselves with dementia, you know the devastation and the whirlwind financially that your families have had to go through. This lab in Berkeley, California has the best and the brightest scientists, and they are facing, because again, of this effort to move efficiency, a $37 million cut that will all but halt the research and send those students home. That is not fear-mongering, that is fact. So for all of the patients, those who are in the operating rooms, sitting outside waiting for your folks to come out, those folks who are care workers, sitting at home trying to figure out how you're gonna make ends meet because you can't work because your father has devastating dementia, I want us to understand what is at play. I'm not blaming anyone. What I'm saying is we're making bad decisions. Yes, we need a more efficacious government, but when you attack the sick, when you attack literally the scientists who are going to cure Americans, we're lying to the people here. Those young people, I met one young man who has dedicated his life to curing cancer. He is in that lab. He doesn't know if he's going to be able to continue. America First looks something very different than what we're purporting here today about creating an efficacious government. The last thing I will say, and I again appreciate knowing a lot about your organization, and while you don't provide direction necessarily to government departments when they've done staff reductions, what your agency has done is guide directors to make those reductions using a process that is concurrent with evaluations, concurrent with making sure that there's deep communication, making sure that those employees have an exit plan that will not exacerbate homelessness in our communities. Thousands of workers have been laid off with no evaluation. We have not stayed true to our union contracts. We need to create a government that is efficacious and efficient, but this ain't it. Thank you so much. I yield my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Fallon from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You know, we sit here all day and we hear folks pontificating, and it's the same old broken record, and I fear that it's going to be like this for 2 years, that, you know, you hear Elon Musk, and you do hear fear-mongering, and you do hear billionaires, unelected oligarchs, blah, blah, blah. Fact of the matter is that when I was serving in the Air Force, I saw many federal workers that did a fabulous job. They were gold coins for this country. Unfortunately, I saw probably slightly larger number that were a complete waste of taxpayer money. It was just not operating efficiently, and they didn't have the motivations, and that's why I think even the father of modern progressivism, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, feared and was not a fan of public sector unions. I want to thank you, Comptroller General Dodaro, for your years of service. Half a century, dare I say, started when you were 5. You had an illustrious career, a very successful one, and a decade and a half in your current position. And sincerely, thank you. Also, you've done significant work with operating and efficiencies in the federal government. I think that you could argue, in a sense, that you were Doge before Doge, or Doge was cool, or at least for half the people on this committee cool, what have you. But the concept isn't new. Long before Donald Trump ever ran for public office, you were doing your work and looking to get a lot of bang for that taxpayer buck. And that's something that should be bipartisan. Doesn't seem to be, unfortunately. But, you know, I'm an eternal optimist, and we can hope for a better day tomorrow. Do you think, sir, that the federal government does, or will operate at maximum efficiency right now?
It does not.
It does not even close. Listen, I had a small company of 100 employees, private sector. I was making a buck. We didn't operate at maximum efficiency. It would be wonderful if we could, but you can't. And there's absolutely no way federal bureaucracy of millions of people. I mean, what you're finding, what is it, about $40 billion a year that you've saved?
Yes.
Because you're doing your work, and maybe we could argue that oversight and accountability works. Looking for those efficiencies and quantifying that and trying to organize it into an effort where we can increase the scale, I think it's a good thing for the country. And I just went to Austin, Texas. I was in the Texas legislature for 8 years in the House and the Senate, and visited with some of my colleagues and then some experts in the Inspector General's office, rather, in Texas. And they were telling us, in their professional opinions, and these folks have done it. One of them, Mr. Chairman, served for 25 years investigating primarily Medicaid fraud. And I asked, in your professional opinion, after a quarter century doing what you've done, of the $50 billion that Texas spends on entitlements, what majority of that is fraud, waste, and abuse? What percentage, rather? And he said at best 10%, and at worst probably just north of 20%. Yeah. So just in Texas alone, we're talking about probably $7.5 billion of money that's spent by the taxpayers, but it's not getting to the people that need it. You get folks that lie on, and sometimes the honor system stuff, or they're making much more income than they admit to, or you've got the fraudsters and the organized criminals that steal, and they're very good at it. They're very sophisticated, and so taking a look at it, we shouldn't be scared of it. We should embrace it. We should run toward it and not run away from it, and not play political games or demonize the most successful human being in history in the private sector. So I wanted to ask you also, sir, some of these initiatives that you had with your high-risk list will, I believe, need congressional action. What specific actions can we realistically take, you think, in the next year or two to see a noticeable difference and improvement?
Yeah, one is to make permanent the use of the death master file, to have Social Security give it to the Treasury Department. That's only on a pilot basis. It's already saved millions of dollars. It needs to be made permanent. We should not be paying deceased people. It took me a number of years to convince Congress to even make that a pilot program. I never thought it would be so hard to stop paying dead people, but apparently it was.
Were they all in Chicago?
I don't know.
No.
I don't think so. I think they're more spread around.
Yeah.
But in any event, that's number one. Number two would be to extend the statute of limitations for fraud in the unemployment insurance program. It's about ready to expire at the 5-year mark. Congress should do as it did with Paycheck Protection Program and extend it for 5 more years to make it 10 years. There's hundreds of cases still being investigated that I think need to come to a conclusion. And
that's for the, was that for the Social Security?
Unemployment.
Unemployment fraud, yeah.
Unemployment insurance fraud. Extend the statute of limitations. Make site-neutral payments a reality for Medicare. If you go to a doctor who's affiliated with a hospital, Medicare pays you more than if you go to a doctor in a private practice. It costs more for co-pays for beneficiaries. CBO's already said in the next 10 years it would save $153 billion. I got many other ones that I could,
I hear you.
enumerate. But
Yeah.
those are three biggies.
Thank you very much. We'd love to get your office on getting an extensive list. And again, thank you for your service, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Min.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dodaro, congratulations on your retirement, and thank you for your service. I appreciate your suggestions. And as a freshman, new to your particular suggestions, these high-risk projects, but appreciate the concept. Like some of my colleagues, I want to first just briefly talk about DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which is apparently not a department, but a temporary organization with all the authorities of a department or agency, but none of the legal requirements that would otherwise apply to a department or agency. Now, temporary organizations, you may know, under federal statute are limited to specific project or study. President Trump's executive order creating DOGE made clear that DOGE's authority was specifically limited to, quote, data modernization. But as has been widely reported, under the leadership of Elon Musk, DOGE has far exceeded those statutory and executive order limitations. DOGE employees have taken over the federal payment system. They've received access to sensitive personal data for any person who's ever received a check from the federal government. They've frozen federal employees out of their computer systems. They've tried to terminate agencies and programs like the Department of Education and USAID. So, Mr. Dodaro, I assume you're familiar with the United States Constitution.
I am.
And so many of my GOP colleagues today were talking about Article 2 of the Constitution. Apparently that was in their talking points for today. But Article 1, Section 1 states that all legislative powers are reserved to the Congress of the United States. Article 1, Section 9 gives us exclusive authority to appropriate money to Congress. Are you aware of any provision in the Constitution that allows the executive branch to unilaterally take away our legislative and appropriations authority?
I'm not aware of that, no.
That's right, because it doesn't exist. Are you aware of any provision in the Constitution that allows a special government employee appointed by the President to unilaterally take away our legislative and appropriations authority?
I don't think Constitution addresses that.
It makes clear it is our authority only. And so what is happening right now with DOGE is unconstitutional, illegal, and I'll make that clear because they are overturning laws that we passed. They're deleting agencies that we have funded and created, and they're doing so without consultation with Congress. So I want to make that clear. Now, Elon Musk has claimed he wanted to eliminate $2 trillion in waste from the federal government. Do you believe that we're going to find $2 trillion in waste if we look through the budget?
Not on an annual basis.
I think he's talking annually, actually.
Yeah,
so.
but that's why I say
Yeah.
that. But no, I don't think that's possible.
And are you aware of the size of the domestic discretionary budget, which is the focus of this hearing and basically every effort that DOGE is looking into?
Yes.
What is that roughly?
That's roughly about, let's see, it's about a third of the, so it's a
900 billion sound about right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little more than that, but yeah.
917, I believe, is the exact number from
It
2020.
may be a little higher than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that's less than $2 trillion, just so we're clear? So we could cut everything from the domestic discretionary budget, every program, every federal employee, and we're only a fraction of the way to $2 trillion, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got Social Security's over $1 trillion, Medicare's over $1 trillion,
Yep.
interest on the debt's over $1 trillion,
Yep.
Medicaid is halfway,
Yep.
more than halfway there.
Reclaiming my time. So $2 trillion then,
Right.
yeah, I think you're suggesting this, but I just want to get to the point.
Right.
We're looking at $2 trillion, and we're only going to get there probably if we cut Medicaid, Social Security, Medicare. Is that about right?
You'd have to get to the big programs. You can't cut the big dollars if you don't go to where
That's right.
spend.
And so do you think there's $2 trillion in waste? If we looked in Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security?
No.
Okay. Do you think there's $100 billion in waste?
Well,
so let me reclaim my time. Many of my House
yeah.
Republican colleagues have expressed their concerns about the $36 trillion debt. I'm also concerned about that. Their proposed budget would cut $3 trillion, including for lifeline programs like Medicaid, SNAP, health care. We're talking about food from hungry babies, health care for sick veterans, but it also adds over $4.5 trillion in tax cuts. So my question to you is math. If you cut $3 trillion in spending but also reduce revenues by $4.5 trillion, does that increase or reduce the national debt?
Well, according to that scenario, it would increase it.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Now, I want to get on a last little line of questioning because many of my constituents have told me they're concerned about the waste fraud, abuse, and mismanagement associated with the idea that one person, Elon Musk, gets to decide so many aspects of the federal budget these days. They're concerned not only that it's illegal and unconstitutional, but that so many of his decisions seem designed to go after the agencies that have tried to regulate his businesses, his competitors. So my last question to you is, if an auditor were coming to audit something for you, but they were a major investor in one of the companies that you were looking at, would you hire them to work on that project?
No.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, we've been asked to, and we'll be looking at the arrangements for DOGE as it relates to ethics and conflict of interest.
Well, thank you very much, and again, appreciate your service.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Dodaro, what are the worst programs for improper payments over the last year?
Over the last year, it's Medicare, Medicaid, the Earned Income Tax Credit, and a Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. And then bringing
Medicare.
up that would be unemployment insurance.
Right. Medicare, Medicaid, and SNAP. The 2025 high-risk report, like the previous reports, continued to paint an alarming picture of the extent of improper payments, those issues facing Medicare and Medicaid. That, I think we agree, and I know the American people agree, that we shouldn't be giving payments to people or businesses improperly. So last year, Medicare improperly paid roughly $51 billion, and Medicaid improperly paid about $50 billion. That's over $100 billion. So why do these programs continue to have such massive issues with improper payments year after year? Because GAO's released a report that estimated between $233 billion and $521 billion, that's $500 billion, was lost annually due to fraud between 2018 and 22. But Medicare and Medicaid in particular, $100 billion in the last year. Why does this happen?
Yeah, well, I think you have a need for better provider screening. In other words, letting providers in there, and you have a need for better enrollment screening. This has been a consistent problem, particularly in the Medicaid area. Yes, in that area. Now, during the pandemic for 3 years, everybody who was eligible at the beginning was deemed eligible throughout to the end of the national emergency. So I don't even think the recent numbers, as big as they are the full amount of improper payments. So there needs to be more rigorous screening and more attention on managed care portion and more auditing there, both of them.
So during COVID, when the federal government lost its mind, and that spanned 2 administrations, people were put on Medicaid without proper screening and things like that. Supposed to be temporarily.
Right.
Medicaid's supposed to be a temporary safety net program. And what's happened is it's become an entitlement. And one of the things that we're proposing in the budget reconciliation bill isn't cutting Medicare and Medicaid like my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. It's trying to reform Medicare and Medicaid to where there's no improper payments. We recognize the fact that you have been writing about this for years. The problem's not getting any better. People got on Medicaid during COVID, supposed to be temporarily, but they're still on there.
Right.
They're still on there. They're not supposed to be on there. Hardworking, taxpaying Americans have to pay for their health insurance, and there are people that are gaming the system getting on Medicare and Medicaid. That's who we are looking at in this budget reconciliation bill. That's what President Trump and DOGE are looking at. This isn't something that we made up. This isn't something that we pulled out of the air. You all have been writing about this for years, and we recognize there's a problem. But the fear, people say, well, why hasn't Congress done anything? This is why. The way they're acting. They wait. People know that Social Security is being scammed. People know that unemployment's being scammed. People know in this chamber that Medicare and Medicaid is being scammed. But they wait. They wait for one person, and it's always a Republican, to be bold enough to say, we need to look at this, and we need to stop these improper payments. We need to stop the waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement. And then the Democrats go, oh, my God, they're going to cut. They're going to cut. The Republicans are going to cut. And then they get their constituents all fired up. They say, oh, Elon Musk is going to steal your Social Security check. And nothing gets done. We are serious about it. The president has a mandate. We appreciate the work that you and your staff has done identifying the high-risk list. But one reason that people in both parties, Congress, for numerous Congresses, has refused to even look at Medicare and Medicaid fraud is because they knew that somebody would try to score political points and spook the elderly people that need Medicare, the children that need Medicaid, the children that need SNAP. They won't face the reality that people have been added to the rolls that shouldn't be on the rolls. They're people ineligible. There are providers in all 50 states that are abusing the system. And it's going to take someone bold. It's going to take a Congress with the backbone to do something about it. And I'll conclude by saying this. We don't want to cut benefits for children. We don't want to cut benefits for the elderly and the truly needy. We want to look at the system and get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse. That's what DOGE is about. That's what President Trump campaigned on. And that's what I hope at least the majority party in here is committed to get his back and try to do that. Because the American people are fed up. They've lost confidence in government. And just as Ms. Green said, an overwhelming majority of people approve of what the objectives of DOGE are, but it's going to be up to Congress to get it done. I think we're seeing tonight during this hearing, there's some people that are going to obstruct and kick and try to score political points, and there are some that are serious, that have rolled up their sleeves, and hopefully we'll get something done. So thank you for your high-risk report, and hopefully this Congress and this administration will have the backbone to do something about this heist of the American taxpayer dollar. So thank you. My time's expired. I now recognize Ms. Presley, I guess, or Ms. Crockett. Who's next? Ms. Presley.
Thank you. Thank you to the Comptroller General for being here today. I'm grateful for your service, and you are a great reminder of the ways in which government does benefit people every day, but they're often unaware. Congress has a duty to ensure that government operates efficiently, effectively, and in the public interest. For any elected official, constituent services are our bread and butter. I know long before I was an elected official, I worked as a constituent services advocate, a Social Security liaison, advocating for our most vulnerable. If your grandfather can't get an appointment at the VA, or if your mom is stuck on hold with the Social Security Administration for hours, you should be angry, and we should be fixing it. But instead of fixing it, the Trump administration has turned over the keys to an unelected billionaire, Elon Musk, through the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Mr. Dodaro, can you define, just so we're operating with the same understanding and comprehension here, can you define government efficiency?
Well, efficiency is getting the best possible outcome with the least amount of resources.
Right. It's not about slashing budgets for the sake of headlines while weakening the very services that keep people safe, fed, and housed. True efficiency is about making government work better for the people, protecting their rights, strengthening essential services, and ensuring tax dollars go to the public good, not private profits. By that standard, DOGE isn't here to serve anyone other than Elon Musk. But let's take a step back. History is important. Mr. Dodaro, do you know how the term DOGE came about?
Not particularly.
Well, it came from an internet meme featuring a Shiba Inu dog that went viral on Reddit, and that meme led to the creation of Dogecoin, a joke cryptocurrency. Eventually, it caught the attention of none other than Elon Musk. In 2019, more than 5 years ago, Elon Musk started tweeting about Doge, making jokes and using the cryptocurrency for profit. He was not interested in government efficiency. He only cared about making money. That's why the actual creator of Dogecoin said that Elon, quote, was and always will be a grifter, unquote. Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this article titled Dogecoin co-creator calls Elon Musk a grifter who had trouble running basic code.
Without objection. It's ordered.
Talk about didn't earn it. So here we are. in 2025, and Elon Musk is still using Doge to make money. This time, instead of pumping up a joke currency for his own profits, he's using a meme-inspired agency to launch a hostile takeover of the federal government. Doge has recklessly fired FAA employees and attacked the agency, all while Musk's own aerospace business benefits from regulatory rollbacks. Make it make sense. Doge dismantled the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, a watchdog agency that returned $21 billion to victims of fraud when he heard it was planning to investigate his company. And just last week, in a moment of stunning incompetence, the administration frantically tried to unfire hundreds of employees they had to let go the day before. Why? Because those employees were overseeing our nuclear stockpile. Those employees were managing the bird flu outbreak. Those employees were providing not nice to have, but essential must-have services that all of our constituents rely on. Mr. Dodaro, do firing workers and then trying to unfire them sound like government efficiency to you?
It's not a best practice.
Sure doesn't to me. What kind of efficiency makes people hungrier? What kind of efficiency makes people poorer? What kind of efficiency makes people less safe? If Trump and Musk truly wanted to make government better, then they would turn to the actual efficiency experts at the Government Accountability Office. But this was never about efficiency. Just like the Doge meme, the lives of hardworking families are a joke to them. I won't stand for it. I know my colleagues won't either, and we'll continue to fight for a government rooted in real efficiency, one that works for everyone, not just for billionaires. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Tlaib.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much. I know it's really incredibly ridiculous. For me, it's really ridiculous that we're sitting here today listening, actually, to this incredibly thoughtful presentation and report from you about all the ways we can make government work better for our families. But tomorrow, my colleagues, my Republican colleagues, are actually going to ignore all of that. They're going to ignore all of your thoughtful and, you know, very investigative, thorough report of looking how we can serve our communities better. And so it's alarming to me because I don't know if you know this, Mr. Dodaro, like our phones have been off the hook of people just increased anxiety, fear of what's going to happen. Many parents who have special needs children who just can't imagine, you know, Medicaid care and health services are being cut. Another person who has access to Affordable Care Act is saying, I can't believe they're thinking about allowing that to increase, I think, an average by $600. I, you know, understand from your report some of the biggest challenges in delivering for our families, for the people that we represent here, stems from staffing shortages, right? And skill gaps that make it very difficult to be effective in delivering disaster assistance. I believe your report said you were about responding to public health emergencies and keeping groceries safe to eat, food safe to eat. Is that correct?
That's correct. 20 of the 38 areas are on there in part because of skill gaps and shortages.
So you're talking about we don't have enough people.
In some cases, that's true, but in most cases, it's having the right skills necessary to do it. It's both. It's both.
I mean, for me, this is, you know, a lot of my colleagues talk about like, oh, Elon Musk is about making more money. I actually think he just likes experimenting, and he's experimenting with us, the American people. It's like a huge experiment and a game or something of that sort. I mean, one day they turn the lights off in one department, the next day they turn it back on. I mean, we're talking about like Head Start programs that didn't even get access to the portal until like I think this past week. That, you know, and these are folks that are offering services already, right? They already rendered the services and they're trying to get reimbursed by us. So do you think, I mean, this experiment, Elon Musk's experiment of indiscriminately firing hundreds of thousands of federal employees working on these key issues will make a positive impact in addressing some of these life and death challenges?
Yeah, I think there's a need for more efficiency in government. I want to be clear about that. And I do think
Yeah, I agree. They should start with the Pentagon budget, but okay.
Yeah, well, it's across the board in government.
agree.
I think you could be more efficient, but you have to approach it in a more thoughtful, deliberative process.
But Mr.
by
Dodaro,
figuring
don't you
out
think
what-
they're hiding behind efficiency? They're
Well,
saying it's efficiency, but it's irresponsibility. It's chaotic.
Yeah, it's not my job to decide
I know that
motive,
you could, but
you know,
think
but I
about it,
don't,
Mr.
I
Dodaro.
don't know
One
what-
day, they say, okay, all these folks are fired. The next day, they say, okay, you can come back.
Well, that's, as I said, that's not a good practice. I mean, I think, well, the good part about it is they recognized it and they brought them back.
Yeah, but
right
even
away.
when they
I
try
mean,
to
but
turn the
they-
lights back
yeah,
on,
but
it's
I
flickering.
think you need to take a more deliberative process. The one thing I've learned, I've been auditing the federal bureaucracy for 50 years, that you need to find out what's the reason why things are the way they are before you change it. Usually, there's a good reason, but not often. But you need to know the answer to that question before you start making changes. Otherwise, you have unintended consequences.
I mean, do you know what they did today? Do you know?
No, I've been
I want
here
you
all
to know
day.
because I think it's
I've been-
important.
yeah.
But you know what they did today? They let go 28 veteran workers. So VA, John Dingle VA in Detroit. It's a veteran hospital. They let go 28 employees. I called, I said, what did they do? Like, I asked simple questions. I don't know if they're doing that. What did they do? Do you know what they did? Most of them were the people that worked in cleaning the surgical equipment. Do you know that we had a audit of the VA?
Yeah.
You know about this, right?
Yeah, well, we did.
People
we
died.
did the
Mr.
audit,
Dodaro,
yeah.
did
They
people
weren't
die at
cleaning
the John Dingle
Yeah.
VA hospital because we didn't have people cleaning the
Right.
surgical equipment? Yes or no?
Right. Yeah, yes, that's about.
So they just let go all these people. So you're telling me my veterans are going to go under a knife and we don't know if somebody's cleaning the surgical equipment?
Yeah, this was a particular problem with colonoscopy.
How is that efficiency? He's experimenting with the lives of our constituents and our residents. You want to come here, he should come here voluntarily. If they won't allow us to subpoena him and answer our questions. What are the reasons behind you letting go these folks behind, again, essential services? That's not efficiency. It's irresponsible. It's almost negligent. It's chaos. Mr. Dodaro, your service is welcomed because we believe we want to be effective in delivering for our families. We do. But this is not the way to do it. And I really do thank you for your service. I know it's a long way and it must be so frustrating. God, watching this last few weeks must be just unbelievable for you. For us, hearing our residents in tears has been painful. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Ms. Crockett.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Dodaro, I'm going to pick up where my colleague left off by number one, thanking you for your service. Even though, I mean, I don't really know if they would have been trying to push you out too, because it seems like anybody that knows what their job is gets pushed out. So congrats on your retirement. And I'm hoping that you have sunnier days ahead. But Ms. Tlaib just went through a series of things that she feels like this is, other than efficiency. And I have a term for what I believe is going on. I think it's just downright cruel. I think that you have people that literally do not have a heart. They're telling us that, oh, no, we're going to run the federal government like a business. Well, let me talk to you about the people that are allegedly running this business, because the federal government ain't a business. But let me clarify. If it was, I don't want it run like the president has run businesses. The president, it's my understanding, has filed bankruptcy 6 times. We don't have that luxury in the United States of America. But even when we start to think about Elon Musk, right now, as it relates to Tesla, the sales are down. As it relates to X, he has never made a profit since he bought X. In fact, the value of X is 75% lower than it has ever been. So if I am going to go look for somebody to run a business, I'm going to look for someone who is going to run one successfully. And before people start screaming and yelling about, well, he's a billionaire. Yeah, when you know the right people and they'll just give you money, then you can become a billionaire too. And maybe one day all of us will have that kind of access. But until then, I want to talk about the fact that congressional Republicans, again, as it's been stated, they don't care about government efficiency. no more than they care about government services and programs that constituents rely on. And just like Elon is hiding from this committee, Republicans are now hiding from their constituents. Under the current Republican budget proposal, 166,000 people in the chairman's district could lose their Medicaid benefits, including more than 70,000 children. The same for the chairwoman of the DOJ subcommittee. Under the current budget proposal, 120,000 people in her district could lose Medicaid benefits, including 75,000 children. This is what efficiency looks like to Republicans, selling out their own constituents to pass tax cuts for their billionaire donors and friends. And rather than taking GAO's recommendations and discussing how Congress can help make federal employees and agencies more efficient, effective, and supported, they're firing probationary federal employees, which again, in my opinion, has led to planes actually falling out of the sky. But nevertheless, which is crazy because no one has been more unproductive than the Republicans on the Oversight Committee. Nevertheless, Mr. Dodaro, of the 38 high-risk areas in GAO's 2025 report, more than half are due in part to staffing or skills gaps, which you've already discussed. In your written testimony to the committee, you stated, quote, "When we have seen progress on high-risk issues, it has typically involved three essential elements: congressional action or oversight, commitment from top leaders at agencies, and active involvement by the Office of Management and Budget. In your opinion, has Congress done enough to ensure the mass indiscriminate purging of federal workforce doesn't, quote, impede the government from cost effectively serving the public and achieving desired results? Yes or no?"
Well, I talked before about telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Sometimes it's not a yes or no. I think Congress should get more engaged and proactive in this area. I've always encouraged administrations in the past to consult Congress in making some changes. Many of these things deal with laws that Congress passed, and I think Congress needs to get more active.
I agree. We need to do our constitutional duty, which is to conduct oversight. So again, I'm inviting Elon or anybody else that's a member of DOJ to come through and we can have a conversation. In fact, I am not aware of any recommendations that really go beyond just cutting those services that people need. There's not been any talk about cutting any of Elon's contracts, though. Not a one. Not that I'm aware of. Maybe you're aware of it, but you are aware that Elon has been getting money from the federal government for a number of years, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it's my understanding that he has not made a recommendation to cut any of his money as we are trying to save money and save this country. At the end of the day, what I am going to say is that we had the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration open 5 investigations on Tesla for complaints of unexpected braking, loss of steering control, and crashes while cars were in self-driving mode. And Tesla tried to block at least 2 rulings from the National Labor Relations Board punishing Elon for tweeting that factory workers would lose stock options if they joined a union. This is a problem. Can you at least tell me that you agree, that you understand what a conflict of interest is, and that Elon may be
I am well
conflicted?
aware of what a conflict of interest is, and we've been asked by the Congress to take a look at this situation, and we will.
Well, I appreciate that. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will yield.
Gentlelady yields back. That concludes our questioners. In closing, I want to thank our witness, Mr. Dodaro, for your testimony today. Thank you for your many years of service. I want to thank your staff once again for your input today as well. With that and without objection, all members have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and additional written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses. If there is no further business without objection, the committee stands adjourned.